Hey there everyone, Atesh here, back again with another video, and in this video, we're talking about Docker. And not just talking about them, we are going in depth of Docker, end to end, all that you should be learning about Docker. I'm 100% sure that you have watched a lot of Docker videos and you're always confused like why so much of the content around the Docker? Is it such a big subject? Is it such a small subject? Should I use it in daily production life? Or what is even the first place the Docker? Why there is so much of buzzword around it? Now the goal of this video is really simple. I have previously explained as well as recorded a few videos on Docker, but now the Docker in 2022 and moving forward 2023 is much more of a simpler subject compared to when it was introduced. When it was introduced, there were so much issues in installation, there's so much issues in walking through the guide of Docker as well. But now it is one of the simplest things that you can install and just forget about things. The way how you write your code is also much more simpler as compared to the previous ones. Nowadays, nobody installs MongoDB, Postgres, or MySQL on their system. A lot of developers prefer to do them with the Docker way, and that means no installation and always reliability when your application moves from your local system to the production. It faces the same environment, that means same bugs, and the same reliability also comes into the picture. Now, I have adopted this new approach of explaining the Docker so that everybody can understand this. Now, I'm sure in a lot of videos you have seen that there are a lot of theories before getting started into the Docker, and then they walk through what is container, what is virtual machine, and all of that. And I recently found out in one of the class that I took that if you go and take a different approach on explaining the Docker, the results are fantastic. The different approach is don't explain them what the Docker, show them what the Docker is. And we're going to directly jump into the part where we actually practically do all the Docker stuff. And in the meantime, in between, I explain you the concept of containers and spaces and volumes and images and all of that. That is far more of an easier way to understand the Docker. And yes, I assure you, after watching this video, you will have no problem in understanding the Docker. Not only that, once we are done with the practical part of this Docker, then we'll move into the project part of the Docker. You will learn that how you can actually Dockerize or containerize your application built in Python and JavaScript and a lot more. But the good part about this course is in the initial section and a long big initial section, you don't have to worry about any programming language. I understand some of you come from Ruby on Rails, some of you come from PHP, some of you come from the world of JavaScript and Java. And you really don't want to use any programming language to understand Docker. I hear you, I understand you absolutely. And in this initial section, we will not be writing any single code, yet you will be mastering the Docker. And that is the best part about this course. Now, there are enough of repositories and images available in the Docker that you don't even have to touch any programming language, yet you will be understanding not just containers, but multi-container deployment as well. Yes, we are going to go through all this right. One thing that is absolutely amazing about this series is we're going to be jumping into the documentation. I know, some of you absolutely hate that. But the way how you should learn things is via the documentation. And that's where I'll be helping you out in looking into the things that how you can look for API references of Docker and learn about more commands. How long you're going to stay with the tutorial? Hell, you need to learn things on your own. And that's where documentation helps you. So welcome on board into this amazing journey of Docker. And together, we're going to have a lot of fun along with from the installation to moving things into the production. I hope you're all excited. Let's go ahead and get started with the Docker. All right. The first section, we are going to go ahead and get started with the installation because that is the most important part. Now, I understand that in a lot of time in the old days, you have struggled with the installation, but that is not the case. We are moving towards 2023. The Docker installation is one of the most simplest one, regardless if you're on Windows or Mac or wherever you are. All you need is the most updated operating system. As long as your operating system is up to date, that's all you need. Now let me walk you through that how you can go ahead and install. It's really the super easy installation. This video was made possible because of Agenty. Agenty.com offers so many of the product. One such product is web scraping. No-code web automation. Now this is a breakthrough and a game-changing stuff. A lot of mobile apps as well as web apps are offering out of the box their services and are earning so much through the advertisement network compared to what they're paying to Agenty.com. I'll talk more about them in a minute. So this is the place where you go on simply to the Docker, and this is where it says, hey, I want to download it for Intel chip or wherever. Now the easiest way, if you're on the Apple chip, you can just click on and download Docker desktop. If you're on the Windows, just click up here. It will download an exe, which is super easy to work on with. It's just an installer execution. Next, I agree, yes, okay. That's all it takes. And it's really simple for Linux as well. Yes, of course, it involves commands, but if you are a Linux user, this shouldn't be a big deal. Now, let me walk you through with a couple of more stuff about the Docker. So if I go ahead and simply go for the Docker, docker.com. So let me go ahead and copy this and paste it up here onto the docker.com. Now notice here a couple of things. There are now products, and don't get afraid about seeing the pricing as well. You don't have to do anything. It's just for the personal, so we don't have to get that. Docker desktop comes up here with unlimited public repositories. For the $5, you can have unlimited private repositories as well. This is something for the companies who would like to containerize that app. And I think $5 is nothing compared to what Docker gives you. Docker is a containerization tool, but we'll not talk about it right now. We'll talk about that later on. Right now, let's go ahead and look for that. Now, two things that are really important for us before we get started. I assume that you have installed it. So go ahead, pause the video and go and download this. Yes, click next, I agree and okay, and just download that. But let me walk you through with that. In the docs.docker.com, you'll find download and install. There is a documentation guide for that as well. Let's first discuss about Mac and then we'll move on to Windows. So if I click on this, notice here I get an option of download with Intel chip or the Silicon chip, Apple Silicon chip. That is totally fine. And there is no such extra installation instruction. You can go ahead and do that from the command line as well, but I highly recommend to go and use the DMG files that comes around. Super easy, drag and drop into your application and works out of the box. Even with the Apple Silicon as well, there is not too much of the things. Now, in the previous days, you need to install some virtualization, VirtualBox, blah, that is gone. That is gone. That doesn't exist anymore. Docker comes with its own kind of a virtual environment, VirtualBox, you can say, and it works out of the box. So that is the best part about it. Now, moving on to the Windows, yes, there was a trouble in the earlier days that it was so difficult to install it. But now Windows is also friendly with the Linux, and the Docker desktop that comes up gives you everything that you need for the virtualization. So you don't need to worry too much. The only thing that you need to make sure that your Hyper-V is enabled. It's really simple. Just look for the Hyper-V, turn it on. That's all you need to worry about that. So that is all what it says. And here it says Hyper-V and containers window feature must be enabled. That's it. Just toggle on the box. That's all it says. And same goes for the Linux as well. Linux is much more friendlier, obviously. The concept entirely comes from the Linux of the namespaces and hence the Docker. So there are multiple ways of how you want to install this. And again, they give you all the option for Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora. Ubuntu is the most common one. If you want to have a GNOME terminal, that's great. Otherwise, it just first asks you to remove. Maybe there is a previous installation. So that is why all the things. Otherwise, just these two commands. Whatever the version you want to install for the Docker, that is it. And you can just go ahead and install and launch that. So told you, the official documentation is always the best guide. Wherever the updates happen, that is where the installation happen. Now, I have already installed the Docker, so I'm going to go ahead and fire up my Docker app here. And it just takes a minute. Once it is installed and it fires it up, it moves it up actually at the top of the desktop. And here it says, hey, this is where the Docker desktop is. Let me quit it so that we can run this again. So this should be gone in a minute. Just waiting for it to go away. It is going to stop everything from the Docker. And by the way, I have actually cleaned up my Docker. So let's just go ahead and fire it up one more time. We're going to go ahead and say, hey, fire the Docker app. And as soon as it comes up, notice here, this is how it starts. It gives you nice graphical interface, both on Mac and Windows. And it just says, hey, I'll be up and running within a few minutes. Now, one most important thing about the Docker. On the left-hand side menu, you can see that there are 4 key important tabs. We can actually remove the dev environment because it's in beta. We don't worry about that too much. The only thing we are worried about is container, images, and volume. So if in the GUI, these 3 things are at the top, that means these are the important ones. If I understand them, if I master them, that's all it takes to understand the entirety of the Docker, isn't it? Let's go ahead and see them. So right now, if I go ahead and look for the container, there is nothing. I can see there are scrolling couple of icons, Redis, Nginx, and Postgres. No idea what they are, but they are somewhere here. Now coming up onto the images, okay, there is no images right now. There could be images in my remote repository. I'll walk you through why that is there, but right now in the local, nothing. And in the volumes, there is absolutely nothing. So right now we are starting absolutely for fresh. Okay, let's go ahead and get rid of that. So this was your brief talk about the installation and how and what position you're going to find your Docker. Okay, let's go ahead. Now in the next step, we're going to talk a little bit about the images so that you first know the first building block of the Docker is to understand and know about images. Let's move on to images. Before we move forward, I would like to introduce you to Agent T. Now, Agent T has a lot of products to offer, and this portion of the video is sponsored by them, and I will walk you through that how actually you can create so many of the web and mobile apps just by using their APIs out of the box. Let me show you a couple of things. So Agent T has a lot of products, as you can see at the top: scraping, detection agent, sentiment analysis, machine learning, a lot of them. What is something which excites me a lot is scraping, and we have actually built a lot of products around this. Not a lot, but yeah, 2-3 products on that. Now it gives you a lot of scraping agent. I'll tell you something. So once you actually do a sign up onto this is how you get a dashboard, and then you can simply go ahead and create a new agent. Once you create a new agent, what you can do is install a Chrome extension of that. And all of these services that they offer are actually available through the APIs. And that's where you can actually build out of the box services. A lot of people are doing it. And it gives you scraping agent. For example, some agents that they have sampledly created is maybe you want to scrap the images which are lazily loading. Not just these images don't come up on just the load of the image. Eventually, as you scroll, they come up. And they have HTML table scraping, JSON data, XML. There's a lot of things. CSV, content scraping. Scrape your content, put it into CSV, directly put it into database, and a whole lot of stuff. Now they have a pretty generous offering of what they can do and stuff, but thing which is going to make you really interesting that yes, you actually have seen some of these implementation is through their browser API. The moment you open their browser API, you can see they have so many of the endpoint to actually do stuff. For example, you can convert any web page into PDF, take screenshots, get any HTML content of any URL, extract some particular data and all of that. And you can try them out using the Postman and their Postman collection. A lot of apps, what they do is use these kinds of resources. So notice here the fetch API. You can use the browser agent APIs, put your API keys, of course, and then can mention any URL and it will convert that into PDF. A lot of websites do that and just put ads on their mobile apps or their websites and actually earn a lot through their advertisement network that is being displayed. So they offer the service to the user for free, but earn like ridiculous onto the ad network. And you can do this all just with the click of that. You can offer so many of these services. Yes, you can manually code them, but if there is something which at a cheap rate can automate that and you earn a lot more through advertisement network, it's almost like a YouTube model that you provide the content for free, but charge other people through different ways. So yeah, it's really great. But not only that, if you can come up here, you can see many other products offered by them like change detection, website change detection, monitor alert, software change tracking. So there's a lot that they offer. And they have a nice examples available and you can check out their pricing. The pricing makes a lot of sense to people who are already into the business domain, but most people will just say, hey, it's not free, but yeah, quality services, you know. They even offer that you can crawl the password protected website. So obviously that comes up with a price, but I would say for corporate, $29 per month is nothing for corporate. And yes, you can definitely go ahead and at least they offer a free trial. Try them out. If you like them, that's great. If you don't like them, that's also great. But I'm pretty sure it's a little bit useful for you as well. All right, let's go ahead and move back to the topic now. All right, so in order to understand about the images, just imagine the world, if you remember that long, there used to be a time when even these Ubuntu guys used to send us the disk images that, hey, if you want to try out our operating system, here's a disk image, the CDs in the world of DVDs. The Docker is inspired exactly by the same thing, that your operating system and everything that you want to run comes in a disk and you want to run that disk. Now, the Docker images are exactly same. Let me walk you through onto the Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is a place where you want to check out for the images. If you go up here, I've already created an account and creating this account and logging in is really important. If you really want to push your images to the Docker Hub for the later on use, or maybe you want to push these images to some private repository, something like AWS, Amazon Web Services, this account is required there also. So creating an account on here is super important. Now you won't be seeing anything up here. These are part of some of the projects that we are going to use later on. Right now, this is all what we have. So Here, notice there is a button which says Explore. You click on Explore and you see few of the common images which has been used for the daily life or maybe for the tutorial purpose and whatnot. So notice here there are a lot of Docker images and all these things going on. What I will do is I'll just click on the Docker hub here again and I'll just click on one more time for the repositories. So these are my repositories. Yours might be empty. What you see on the Docker Explore is the repository contributed by a lot of companies as well as developers like you and me, whatever the resource they wanted to give to the community. Now, notice here, the first one is Alpine. So obviously these are suggested images and there are a lot of recently updated as well. Notice here, Nginx, which is a server. We'll talk about them in some another video, which is a good popular one. We have Postgres, we have Redis, we have Mongo, we have Memcached, Hello World. There's a lot of them here. Now, few of them are really insanely crazy popular one. For example, let me walk you through this BusyBox. Look at the downloads here. Can you imagine 1 billion downloads? That is crazy. Look at this other one. The Python one has 1 billion downloads. And there is also Ruby, quite popular one, 500 million downloads. So some of them are really, really popular one. BusyBox is one such image which has been used. It's almost like a Linux. So whenever we used to teach these Docker concepts, we just wanted to have a Linux so that we can teach the people the power that, hey, you can actually run a Linux just like in the VirtualBox in the Docker world. And every tutorial has actually used that, including me. But I realized over the time, this is not the best way. And although I do have a series which uses BusyBox, I realized there could be a better approach of having this. So notice here, there is even the Ubuntu, our everybody's favorite. So in the world of Ubuntu, I can see that I can just run this command, docker pull. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I have a lot of tags. Tags basically means which version you want to download. So there are a lot of versions. Obviously, from Ubuntu, we have seen a lot of evolution of Ubuntu. All these things you can find up here. So there's a lot of tags going on. If I go on to the overview, it says, hey, this is all the supported tags, means you can download the version of Ubuntu from 16 to 14 to 22, wide variety of range. How we can do that, we're going to learn that later on in this video, of course. But this is all what it says. Now, this is not, a lot of people just look at for the tags and just read it till here, which is not a good thing. A lot of the juicy information about how to run the images and how it works and what are the important information comes at the little bit lower there, where it says how the root file system was built and all of that. Right now, Ubuntu is very easy in that part, so we don't worry too much on that, but we'll come back onto this one. All right, so far, one concept is clear, that images are nothing. These are just like CDs and DVDs, the disk images, which has a lot of things in it, and we can just run them. Now, later on, we're going to understand that, hey, how is it different from virtual machine and all of them? Right now is not a good time. So we get the idea. Let's open this up and see that how much we have covered. All right, I understand that what are my images? These are just like DVDs. It could be of Ubuntu. It could be a simple Redis. It could be a MongoDB, Postgres, whatever you are comfortable with. All right. But what are these containers? That's an interesting one. Now, whenever a CD comes to your home, just like in Ubuntu, do you remember that you could have actually gone ahead and installed that on your system? Yes. Now your system will be called as container. Yes, exactly. That is super simple. Just like CDs and DVDs need to be used in some computer, and that computer could be yours, your friends, or anybody, that system is now an Ubuntu system. Similarly, we have a concept that now systems are so much powerful. Gone are the days when we used to have 5 MBs of RAM. Now we have everything in gigabytes, which is pretty powerful. You can actually center up a sandbox environment, an environment which is simply just there, which do not interact with outside environment just easily. And it's just a standalone computer, almost like that. If using that images, you boot it up and you load up all the things, that is your container. Told you, it's super simple to go ahead and work with that. Okay, right now we understand majority about the images, but we understand like 40 to 60% about what is container. So we're gonna go through and work with that. All right, so this is the time when we actually go ahead and work on with that. So we're gonna mess up with something which is really, really popular and a little bit difficult to work on with that, which is known as Postgres, a really popular database which is available. And notice here, the commands are almost simple. Docker pull Postgres, Docker pull Ubuntu. So this one command is going to do everything? Yes, this actually does everything for us. So let's go ahead and understand first that what this command is and how it works, and then we're going to pull this image. So we're going to go ahead and fire up a terminal. Now go ahead and switch up your videos into a larger resolution. These videos are recorded in 4K so that you can watch everything in a crystal clear manner. If you're going to be watching in 480, this will not be clear. Docker output is really long and big, and we need to see all of that output in one single shot directly up here. So that is why I recommend to bump up your resolution. Okay, all right. So when you install the Docker, it actually gives you a couple of Docker commands, not just the Docker, a couple of them. If I hit my tab key after writing the Docker, notice here it says, hey, you can actually see Docker Compose, Docker Compose v1, credentials or desktop and whatnot and all of that. The two most important for our purpose is Docker and Docker Compose. Not just for our purpose, the entirety of the thing that you will be doing is going to be just these two commands. And notice here, if I want to check the version, I have no idea how to do that. I can run -v or maybe -- version. No idea which one to actually pick up. So I'm going to just go ahead and take a guess, -- version. It says, hey, this works. But what if I could have just said, hey, I want to just go ahead and see you a -v. Let's see what happens to that. It still gives you that. What about -v? This time it failed. So the reason why I'm showing you this is Docker actually comes with a lot of commands, and you can see that here in the list here, there are a lot of version options, -v, -- version, which prints out the Docker version. But not only that, it gives you commands like there's a config, there is a node, there is also a load, login, logout, a lot of them. Now, how we can learn and study more about them? Some of them, obviously, we're going to study in this particular video, but how we can learn and explore more. This is exactly known as the API references. And API simply doesn't mean something which is on the web or gives you REST API. No, it doesn't work like that. API is simply an interface, and this is an interface of how Docker interact with my system or its own internal system. So that is where the reference comes up. So this is browse through the CLI and API reference of documentation. If I click on this, notice here, there is an API reference. I'll click on this. There's a Docker engine, there's a Docker hub API and registry API. Obviously, we're going to go for just the Docker engine. And here are a lot of things going on, so you can see. But also if I look for the command line interface, Docker CLI, Docker Compose, Docker CLI, which is Docker D. We're not worried about that. We'll just go for the Docker CLI. Okay, notice here, there's a lot of commands going on in here. For example, if I want to just check out, hey, what this Docker login does, let's just go ahead and see that. Or maybe there is a Docker version. We just ran that command and we want to learn more about it. I'll click on the Docker version and it says, hey, you can run Docker version and then can provide some options. For example, I can provide an option of formatting, which formats my option. And here are some of the Docker version options that you can go through with that. If I go ahead and format in this format, it will give me an output like that. Pretty interesting. And let's go ahead and copy this command and try to move on to terminal and see that if this works. If I go ahead and work on with that, notice here, it gives me a version of, and I accidentally copied a little bit more. So I'll just copy, it copies actually everything. Not a good idea. So I'll just copy this one. This should be improved. Copy that. And let's go ahead and try it one more time. And I run this one. At this time, it gives me this version. But if I go ahead and try the previous version, Docker -v, then it says, hey, Docker version, all of this. So you get the idea that if you really want to dive deep into some command, maybe for some output, API references is the best way of doing that. Now, don't worry. I'll not throughout the way. We'll talk about the API versions of this one. So, but then the Docker documentation is equally important. All right. So let's go ahead and try to interact with that. Now I want to learn about one of the command, which is Docker pull. Let's see what it does. So I'm going to go ahead and search for Docker pull. Thank goodness that they are in the alphabetical order. So I'll just go for Docker pull. Now this is a command for pull an image or a repository from the registry. Too many jargon words. All it is saying is, hey, just pull up an image. It's mean like just place an order for the image and grab that image. Notice here, we are just grabbing the image. We are not running that image. That means we are not installing it on a computer right now. We're just going to be pulling that image. Right now, we are interested in pulling the image of Docker pull and simply Postgres. All right, so I'm going to just copy this command, which says Docker pull Postgres. We'll move on to my terminal, really big one. Clean all of this. Control L is always the shortcut to clean this up, and I'm going to paste this up. Let's see what happens with that. Now it says I'm using a tag, which is the latest, which is the default tag. Okay, new information that whenever you don't mention the tag, it pulls the latest of the image. But if the latest is not available, you have to explicitly mention that tag. Now notice here, I just asked him to download one image, but it is downloading so many of them. Now this is where the core practice of the Docker comes up. The Docker images are not built via just, hey, here is a Postgres software, you take it. No, it doesn't work like that. In the world of Docker, Docker images are composed of a variety of layers, and you just saw that the layers are available. Now these layers make the Docker super smart. Let's just say you have worked onto Postgres and there are some of the things which you have changed, but underline what is the operating system which is running it. And yes, all the Docker images comes with we cannot call it as a full-fledged operating system, but some component which allows the software to run. So those components are still same. Maybe majority of the Postgres is also same. Just a few top of the things are changed. So we don't need to change entirety of the things. We just need to update a few things. And if somebody who is already having this image, he just need to change a little bit. So that makes images more efficient. So always remember, Docker is not composed of just one image. It is composed of a variety of layers that comes into the picture and helps you to get that. All right. So now, we can see that the docker.io library Postgres latest was downloaded and downloaded a newer image. All right. Now what happens if I run this command again? If I run this command again, notice here what happens. Let's see. There we go. This time it was super fast. So we concluded that if the image is not present in our system, it will go online and will pull that images. Now here is a side note. Now I am logged into hub.docker.com. But the images like Postgres, Mongo, Nginx, these are public images so that you don't need to log in to download these images. But if you're trying to download something which is private, you obviously need to log in. And I'll walk you through how login actually works. No worries on right now. So we have concluded that we don't need to download this image again, but I want to see how that image looks like. So there are a couple of ways how we can do it. The first way is obviously going back into the documentation. And we can see that there are something which is known as Docker, something related to image. So I'm going to go ahead and say Docker image. I should be actually able to see that. There we go. Docker image. So let's go ahead and explore that. So we have this Docker image and a lot of commands involved with that. I'll just look for Docker image. It says Docker image and command. So there are a lot of commands you can use, like for example, to build, to history, import, ls, list images, nice one. This is something that we can use. There's also to prune the images, remove the unused images, prune, easy way, remove. Okay, so this is all we can do. Let's try and run this list of images. This is a nice command. So we're going to go ahead and say Docker image. Remember, we didn't call images. These are two different things. We are just looking for Docker image. And then we can go ahead and say ls. And I'll just escape, hit enter. And I have an image, which is Postgres, latest with the tag, the image ID, and then I have 7 days to go. The image size is 358 MB. It's a little big, but it's okay. Let's go ahead and see that in the visual aspect. And I go on to images and I see the exact same information. Notice here, the tag is exactly same, 340F, 340F. And we have the latest unused 8 days ago it was created. We have all these images. We can run it from here as well. I don't want to, but we can. And I click on that and we can actually go ahead and push it to hub, view details, blah, blah stuff. Not interested much into that. Okay. All right. This is great so far. And we can see that this is now in my local. And I told you that I can actually go ahead and log in, click on the repositories, and these are the repositories which are pushed by me. So later on, we'll learn that how we can push it and how you can also push it. But if I check it, since I'm logged in, I can look into remote repository and I can list down that these are the remote repository which I have pushed. So you get the idea that these are nothing more than just pushing the images. All right. So next up is now we're going to see that how we can actually run these images. Before we run these images, I'll walk you through with a couple of more commands. And the simple commands that we're going to go through is docker ps. So let me go ahead and search for that. And that is docker ps. Now this is also an interesting command. It has a lot of options. Docker ps, a lot of options. Like for example, I can give it --all to show all the containers. I can filter them, format them, God knows what. There's so many examples of that. It shows the both running and stop container by option -a. Everything is here. Everything in the documentation. You might get frustrated, but I'll still introduce you to the documentation because that is the way to learn. All right, let's move on to the terminal and we learn another command which says docker ps. It lists all the containers. Right now there is no container. And as I just a moment ago told you, that images is like ordering a simple image from the Ubuntu company, or maybe this time Postgres company. And we haven't installed this image on any computer. The moment you install that on a computer, that is your container. That's exactly what we want to do now. So now I don't know how to actually do this. So let's go ahead and again, yes, documentation. There is a nice and easy command which says docker run. Now the docker run has a lot of options and the command actually goes really, really big. It has an option of docker add host and whatnot. You can see this is the most used command. So that is why so many options are given to you. Yes, I can keep on scrolling. But the easiest one that it says that, hey, you can run a docker run -- name test, then the -it and the Debian. We don't have Debian, we have Postgres, but we can actually modify this command a little bit. Now, one option I'm looking up for is what is this -it? Because it sounds interesting, it might be really good. Let's go ahead and try to search for -it. And there we go, should be here somewhere, -it. Somewhere, let me just go ahead and try this out. Okay, do we have anything above? Nope. All right, so this is the -it, and here we go. The -it instructs Docker to allocate a sudo terminal connected to the container. Too much of this. Basically, it says that, hey, I want to interact with this image, so just give me a terminal so that I can get into this and have my terminal to interact with it. Yeah, really most used command. Okay, all right. So based on this, let's see that it is giving it a lot of option, -- name, then test, and then it. Can I skip all of them and can directly say docker run Debian? Let's try this out. So let's go ahead and see that if I go ahead and say it directly like docker run and the name, which is Postgres. And again, it is super important that you give the exact name as the name of your image. In this case, the name of the image, if I can just get it, the name of my image is Postgres. And since this is the latest image, I don't have to say :latest. If this would be some specific version, which we are going to get, then I have to mention that version. For example, 3.2, whatever that version is. You can grab these version and I have to mention. Now, some people prefer to put something like release at the end. Whatever the tag is, you have to specifically mention that. Some people like to say, hey, I want to use Alpine. We'll talk about that. But yes, you have to go Alpine. Then you have to go ahead and use that. All right. Right now, in this case, we know that :latest is by default. So I'm not going to just write anything and I'll just hit enter. Now, it says, hey, there's some problem. The database is uninitialized and super user password is not specific. That means probably we are doing something wrong. That this first image that we picked up for the demo is not working. And this is exactly why I wanted to bring your attention. Now, when you take an example like BusyBox, Debian, Ubuntu, it works out of the box. It just works and you feel so happy about it. And you miss the most important part of learning about the Docker. Let's go ahead and see that onto the Docker Hub. We're going to go on to the Postgres and we're going to see that how this is actually working. We scroll a little bit and it says how to use the image. So we have a long command that says, hey, you have to use docker run -- name some Postgres. This is just a name. You can call it Superman, Hitesh, whatever you like. Then you have to use -e option and have to provide Postgres password, my secret password. Then say -d and Postgres. All right. So instead of walking you through again into documentation, I can brief you and summarize you what all these options are. Now, whenever you start any kind of database, which is like Postgres, MySQL, they just don't work out of the box. They have to be passed on some environment variable that, hey, I know I'm the authorized guy. I'm logging in with the default passwords, default usernames, whatever that is. I just want to get in the images. Now, a couple of more options are here, -- name. That is super important. We'll come back onto the later one. Right now, whenever the container is created, a name is given to it. Sometimes people don't like that name. So they want to pass an argument and give their own specific name. We'll skip this part of the command. So we'll not just go with that. And then on top of that, we want to pass on an environment variable that, hey, This is the variable name, and this is my value for that. And -d is a detach mode. That means whenever a container spins off, it actually keeps your terminal busy. If you really want to move that container into back of the scene that, hey, I want my terminal free, then you provide this -d as a detach mode. Pretty simple. Yes, it's not that complex. So let's go ahead and see that if we are able to actually run this through this exact same command. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this entirety of the command, and I want to modify this. It's not like I want to directly use this command. I'll move on to terminal. I'll paste this command, but I want to see that what happens when I don't give a couple of options. For example, this -e is compulsory because that's exactly the warning it gave it to me. But here, in this case, the name doesn't seem that important. So let's go ahead and try this out by removing the name. All right. Like also, I want to see what happens when I don't give this -d. What happens when it is not in the detach mode? Let's go ahead and try this out. So our command is really simple. We want to say docker run instead of Postgres. Now this additional information came in. And again, I told you -e is just passing on some environment variables. All right, let's hit enter. And now it says, hey, there's something happening. It is better than the previous one. And at the end, it says database system is ready to accept connections. So that is a moment of pride that at least we were able to learn something from the documentation and study it out, and we were able to spin off a Postgres. Now, I hope you can imagine the power. You can fire up as many Postgres as you want, and your system will not take that much of the heat it used to take when you install multiple versions of Postgres. It's cool. All right. Now, let's study this a little bit, that what is happening. Okay, a lot of things happening, but my terminal seems to be busy. Can I run more commands here? Can I go ahead and say ls? Hit enter? Nope, I cannot. It just keeps on hitting. Now, I would like to press Control-C so that it stops everything. It says, hey, database system is shut down. Interesting. So as soon as I get away from the terminal, it just shut down my entire container. Let's see what is happening from the visual perspective. I go onto the container. All right. So there is a youthful habit, something, and this Postgres latest. So this is exited. Both of them are shut down. All right. This is looking good. And if I click on this run show only running container, there is nothing right now. That means I was able to pull down Postgres. I was able to run it for a minute, but it's gone now. All right. And notice here, youthful habit. There is also a weird name, Zeno something. I'm not loving it. Let's go ahead and try to see that what was this -d option was giving us. -d, which says detach mode. I hit the enter. It returns me a long string, but does nothing. I can run my command. The container is free. The terminal is free. I go back and look at the dashboard and see that, all right, a new container was spinned up. Okay, it didn't use the previous one. Notice, concluded that it doesn't use the existing container which is stopped. It creates or spins a new container every time when I run a Docker run. This time it calls it as lucid_ls, and it's running, and it's keep on running. That means, at least as of now, I can assume that I was able to successfully run it. Great. So far, great. Now let's see that how can I stop this? Right now, I don't know the stop command. So I'll just come here and stop this. And yep, it exited. It exited. All right. Now let's go ahead and see that if what we do is missing commands are being broken down again. So I go ahead and say that, hey, I want to use --name, and I want to call this as my Postgres-1. I highly recommend to use dashes instead of spaces. Spaces is not a good idea, especially in the command. Let's go ahead and hit enter here this time. Okay, I notice here this string is different than this string. So I'm pretty sure you can vouch it that it spins a different container this time. If I go onto the dashboard, okay, but this time the name is not lucid and youthful. It says my Postgres. The string is same, 82E37. Great. And it's running. It's keep on running. Now I want to see that what kind of, or what all containers the Docker is running. Enough of stopping from the GUI, like who uses GUI in the world of Docker. I want to see what all is there. So if you remember, we learned about a command which says docker ps. And all right, we can see that the container is running. Now this my name is spilling out to the next line. So I hope you can adjust that. And that is why I told you, spin it up to the 4K so that you can see all of this nice and clean. I do have a container ID. I do have a Postgres image and the command something. It was created up here, status, and the port is also here. Interesting. We'll talk about the port later on. But right now, let's just see. We can also conclude one thing, that this was a long string, but this guy is giving me a really strong, really short one, just 5 or 6, 7, 10 keyword, 10 letters out of that starting. So how can I stop this now? Now stopping the container is really, really easy. It's not really that of a big deal. Let's see from the documentation. I want to stop a container. So there is a Docker stop. All right, let's go ahead and see this Docker stop. And then it says, hey, you have to mention the container. Let's see, is there an example? Docker stop my container. Interesting. So there are a couple of ways I can conclude from here that Docker stop, and then I can mention my container. Now, if I know the name of my container, that's great. But if I don't know the name of my container, I can actually mention the container ID. Both are same. And I'll just have to say 82E3. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to write entirety of the thing. You can definitely go ahead and copy paste it. But if you write just the few initial letters of it, and as long as some another container is not confused with it, then it will just stop the right one. If it found an ambiguity that, hey, there are random chances that the both containers are having first 4 initial letters same, then it will do nothing. Yes, that's the great. So let's go ahead and hit enter, and it says, hey, this is stopped. And verifying it is also super easy for us that, hey, everything is exited. Let's try it one more time. This time we're going to run this again. And this time we're going to run it with, and again, notice here very carefully, if I run this command again, we're about to see an error. Let's see that. It says, hey, you are running an error which name is already in used. So either you have to remove it or reuse the name. So we'll learn that how this can be done. But yes, I can actually go ahead and run this container again. And yes, there is a command. I can just say, hey, Docker run, and just run my Postgres machine like that. Or I can just come to that here and I can run this again. And I know that this is running my Postgres 1, and I can go ahead and stop this. So I'm going to go ahead and say this time the name, which is my Postgres 1, hit enter. And obviously this is going to stop that. So there we go. All right. A lot of things happened, but notice in the image, we have just image. Container, we have spinned many. That's okay. And the volumes, there are a lot of volumes is being created. We have zero idea why this has been created, but it has been created. So at least so far, we have some confidence that how this can be done. All right, so this is good so far. Now, I want to do something more. Let's go on to this one where the Docker is. And I can see there are a lot of images. For example, there is a 13.8 image as well. So my next obvious step is going to be really simple, that I want to try out the power of the Docker. I want to run a Postgres, which is absolutely latest. And I also want to run a Docker, which is any given ID or the tag. In my case, let's pick up 13.8. I want to run both of them and see what happens. That would be the next step that we'll be taking up. Let's go ahead and check that out. All right, so the goal is really simple. I want to spin up 2 machines, one with Postgres latest, one with the Postgres 13.8. Rest of the stuff will remain exactly same. For example, the stuff which says, hey, you have to provide the default password. So the default password is same because it's the same machine, and we have to provide some name as well. Otherwise, it would be confusing for myself to differentiate between which one is the latest machine and which one is the old one. All right, that's all what we need. Let's go ahead and work on with our terminal. First, before I go there, I would like to see onto the dashboard that I have containers which are running this, so I won't be using this name. I'll walk you through that how you can flush out all the containers, can reuse the containers. That is something we're going to study later on. Right now, this is all the information I know. All right, so we do have this command which we wrote, which is really simple, which says Docker run, and I want to use different names for each one of them. Now, the most important one is the first one, which we are going to go ahead and call this one as simply Postgres latest, and I want to go ahead and use this. So again, the most important part is this. This is the Postgres. When you don't provide any of the tag, it uses the latest of the image. So let's go ahead and at least finish the half portion of the task, which is getting us a Docker image, which is of the latest type. All right, this should be done by now. And let's go ahead and again verify with the dashboard. Okay, the Postgres latest is available. It is running 7 seconds. Great, fantastic. Now, how can I go ahead and grab the Docker, which is a little bit later, which is, let's just say 13.8. You can feel free to pick any one of them. I go ahead and work on with that. And obviously I'll be saying a different name for this one. I actually missed the final T of that, but you get the idea. And we're going to call this one as Postgres old. Maybe you want to give it a Postgres 13, whatever the name is. It can be any name. But I have to mention that colon 13.8. So whatever the tag name is, you have to provide exactly that. For example, if I go ahead and use the version 14-Alpine, I'll in a minute discuss what is this Alpine, and you're going to see this throughout in Docker world. You can go ahead and mention colon 14-Alpine or 14.5 Alpine or 14-Bullseye, whatever the version you want to go with that. I'm happy with 13.8 and I'll hit enter. And what is going to happen? This is the time where you should be expecting. It is not able to find that image on my local system. So it's going to do something different. It's going to go on to the internet. We'll look up, hey, can I go ahead and download the Docker version 13.8? We'll bring it to my system and then we'll run it. So what can we say? We have concluded that this run command is actually composed of two different commands. It can actually go ahead and pull some images from the internet and also can go ahead and just run this if the image exists. And looks like there is something. It says, hey, I'm not able to find 13.8 locally. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to pulling the images from the online. And sometimes it takes time, depends on internet speed, connectivity, there are a lot of variables. But as you can see, again, we can re-verify that the Docker image always comes in layer. And this image is downloaded, as well as this is the ID. Just like here it gave me an ID, it is also giving me an ID. Let's verify this with the Docker dashboard and can see how many images we have. We have two images, both Postgres. One is 13.8, one is latest, verifying that. And we have container as well. Now this container, we have two containers, Postgres old and Postgres latest. Okay, now there is something really interesting we should talk about here. Now, this information is not given to you here. The port section is totally empty. But if I go on to the Docker here, I can see at the scrolling a little bit, that Docker has a specific port on which it runs. Right now, there is no mention of it. I'm pretty sure there is some. So let's just scroll it a little bit. There should be some port mentioned up here. And looks like a little bit difficult to find. All right, so right now we don't have any of such information that where it is, but we can see that there should be some issues. Okay, right now it's not giving, but let's see what is happening. Let me open up the terminal and show you that. We have already learned a command which says docker ps, and there you go. Now, this is a little bit, let me shrink this a little bit so that you can see all of this in one line. This is super important to see all in one line. There we go. At least now you can see the ports. Now the default port of the Postgres is 5432 and here also 5432. Now this is 100% sure that if you run two services on single port, they are going to get conflict. This is not a rocket science. Everybody knows about this. So yes, we are running two different versions of Postgres on one port that are obviously going to create issues. So in the future, we have to learn that how we can pass on one more parameter so that this port conflicts can be avoided. And we can learn something about port mapping concept. In the early days, I showed you that images is like DVDs and container is like running a virtual machine in your system. Almost like it's not a virtual machine. It's very lightweight than a virtual machine and doesn't include an entirety of the kernel as well. So the thing and important part is that whenever you run this machine, which is a sandbox environment inside your computer, it needs to expose some port so that outside your computer or your entire world can actually connect over through that port. That is what exactly the port opening or the port mapping says. Your main computer to this closed environment. This 13.8 and this latest version, both needs to have a port. Now we can be assured that this always is going to open up one port, which is 5432. But this 5432 can interact with 5000 on my machine, and this 5432 can interact with 4000 on my machine. So all I have to do is just mention different ports and these two services can be interacted with. How cool is that? All right. So that is why I told you, learning things on the go is far more easier in the world of Docker than just mentioning these presentations and all of that. So this is super easy. All right. So now we need to learn that how can I stop this container? We have learned that so far we can stop that by using that click. Now we want to do that. we'll just say, hey, there are some options here like container. And there are a lot of options here. So obviously, whenever we have these options, we go up here and we see that, hey, I want to learn about the Docker container. So can you actually explain me a lot? Here it is. So Docker container has a lot of things: attach, commit, copy, create, execute, export. There are a lot of things. If you want to learn about any one of them, you can go ahead and learn that. I want to learn about Docker container stop. It says Docker container stop and give me a container, and you can provide options as well. Like for example, time, t, like that. There's a lot of options, but right now, these are all related commands. I don't need to study. All it is saying that, hey, there's an option of -t in case you want to know the time, but all you have to say is Docker container stop and then provide me the container. Okay, all right, seems pretty easy. Let's go ahead and see that. I will say, hey, Docker container stop, and I'll give you the name. So I have the name Postgres latest and Postgres old, but I'll go with the container ID this time for one. So let's go ahead and hit enter. There we go, it stopped. And for the second one, I would love to go for the name. But first, I'll say simply Docker ls and, oh, my bad, Docker ps to actually see the container. And by the way, there is also one more command. You can go ahead and say Docker container ls, and it also gives you the list of all the containers that are running. Yeah, that is confusing. You can run Docker ps2, that also gives you the same, but you can also run Docker container ls, which also gives you the same. I get you there, but this is how the world works. A lot of options to do the same thing. Now let's go ahead and stop the another one. Docker container stop, and we'll give the name this time. The name is Postgres latest. So we're going to go ahead and say Postgres latest without the T, which I made a typo. Let's hit enter, and there we go. Now in theory, there should be no container which is up and running. So let's go ahead and see Docker container ls. There is no running container as of now. If you remember in the documentation, we learned about one more command, which is -a, which gives me the list of all the containers, whether they are in running mode or not. There we go. So many containers are there. And yes, this is where the shipping container and all these things comes around. Pretty nice, actually. All right. So this is good. And here are a couple of things I would like to mention. The first thing is a common argument that comes up is Docker versus VM. Now, VM is bloated. It is very heavy. It's almost, no, it is not almost, it is running an entire operating system on top of an operating system. That is your virtual machine is. Docker is not like that. Docker runs your application on top of the system. It doesn't include the entire kernel. That is the most important difference between the two. The most important thing that you should always keep in mind is Docker is comprised of whatever the application you have, enough of configuration and enough of the OS layer that can bare minimum run it. It uses and interact with the host kernel that whenever it is required to do something. For example, there are some commands that you want to run, for example, some copy commands, which runs actually on the host and moves things into the container. That is where Docker interacts with the API of the host. Simply saying, it interacts with the commands of the host. That is how it works. So this is the most important. And really simple, and the speed. Most important part of speed, Docker is super fast. The way how you are able to run these OS just like a breeze of a command and how fast this is working, not at all. Likely, remotely, nearly possible in the world of virtual machine. For this long, we would have just spinned off one machine. That's it. And we are spinning up machines and containers like anything. This is the real power of this one. All right. Now we want to run certain things as well and want to explore a little bit more of the database. I will not remove anything. The containers, let them run. We'll remove them later on. We'll see some of the standard commands. A hack from the Stack Overflow that I found. Everybody found it from there. And we'll see that how we can remove all the containers. In fact, let me first show you that because I'll want to show you the actual resource where it actually came from that. So we're going to just find out Docker stop all containers. So there is a nice hack and we're going to say that stop. We have already stopped. So let's just go ahead and search for remove all containers. Remove all containers. So there is a nice hack on the Stack Overflow. It actually pops up first there and then everybody started to just move it there. There's a nice interactive guide here. So you can just use Docker system prune. Obviously we can, or we can say Docker container prune. This will remove all the stopped container. All right, we know that. We can learn this from the simple commands as well from the documentation, we know that the Docker container prune is there, and we can see that it removes all the stop container. But what's the fun in that? We can actually go ahead. What I want to show you something here is something this. So a guy got from Charmes credit. So he actually showed that you can actually use docker remove and can pass an argument docker ps and just get all of this, and it will also remove that. I don't recommend this, but still a lot of people will show off you for the PowerShell user and all of that. Right now, let's try what is this another command that we just saw here, docker container prune. Let's see what happens with that. Let's go ahead and say docker container prune. Let me move that on the top. Prune. Let's hit enter, and it says, hey, this is a warning because this is a sensitive operation. You should not be just randomly doing it. Do you really want to remove all the stopped container? Because you could have reused them. Maybe there's some volume in that. Maybe some data is there. I don't know. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. And it removes all the container. So we can see this is a really solid command, but very dangerous also. And we're going to run this. No containers at all. Still, we have these images so that we can spin off things whenever and wherever we want. We still have a lot of volumes. That is also there. And we can just use the command. Guess what would be the command for volumes? Yep, you get it right. Docker volume. And of course, ls. And here are all the volumes available. So whenever there is a database that is being created, it requires to store all of this database information somewhere. And since this entire Docker system is a virtualized system, that is why you see these virtualized volumes are being created. It is almost like you can say some space of the disk is being allotted to that particular image that, hey, if you want to keep all of your files, keep it here. But you cannot access them directly here. There is a lot of ways, a lot of trickeries behind the scene that Docker does, but you cannot just go ahead and find them and do an ls and can see them. There is a bit different way of finding them. We'll talk about them later on. Right now, let's try something different with enough of Postgres. Let's move on to different database now, because that is where we are going to learn so much. Everybody's favorite, Mongo. And again, you saw that in the Postgres, we didn't need any information or expertise in the Postgres. Similarly, you don't need any expertise in Mongo, and you will be able to learn and deploy multi-container app in the Docker world with the Mongo. So I can see the command is really simple, which says, hey, all I want to do is docker pull Mongo. Let's go ahead and copy this command. You obviously know what this is going to do. It's going to pull an image of Mongo for me. Which image? Which version of the Mongo? If you say it latest, you are correct. If you didn't say that, you should say at least in the comments that what is the latest version and all of that. So that is where we are going to go for. All right. So this is where it downloads the MongoDB, and there we go. Now, in the meantime, let's study what all it has to say and offer. So obviously we know what is Mongo, and it says, hey, start a server instance. You can just name it in the detach mode, and then it's going to run. Now, to connect the MongoDB from another Docker container, you have to provide some information. All right, we'll do that. And then it also says if you want to write them up, interesting. If you want to write them up, we can just use all these options. Restart always. Interesting. We'll see about them. All right. So this is the basics it gives us. Let's say, since it is saying me directly that to start a service of the Mongo, all you got to say is docker run, name it if you want to, use the detach mode and give it a Mongo and colon tag. We don't need to give tag. We are using the latest one. All right. Let's see what is there. Again, I would love to verify. This time I will not verify from the Docker GUI. I would verify that from the images because I know the command docker image ls. And let's see. All right, we have a Mongo image. We're going to go ahead and say docker run. And this time I want to run Mongo. I'll name this one as well. And I'll call this one as my Mongo 1. And I'll say that, hey, which image do you want to use for it? I want to use it in detach mode. Of course, I want to keep my terminal free. And I want to use the image which I just downloaded, Mongo. So now you can see that it is not difficult to pull down any image and run that image. Now, the problem with that is that I have just got this one here. And if I go ahead and do docker container ls, it gives me that. Now this time, notice here, the Mongo is running on 27017. All right, that's great. But how can I interact with this Mongo? Because right now, is this 27017? This is the only way to interact. And there is one more problem. What if I run another instance of Mongo? Will I be able to interact with that? Nope. This is exactly where I told you that we want to learn about the port mapping. That one version of the Postgres is running 13.8, the latest is also running, and we want to map them onto a certain port on my host machine, different port for them, and we'll learn about them. So we're going to go ahead option, and let's see that if we want to learn about the Docker, we'll just remove the container, and we can see that this Docker, the basic Docker command, let me just find that, Docker, let me just go ahead and search for that, hey, is there something related to port? We should actually be searching in the search. Is there a search box? Nope. Okay, all right. Let me just show you that, how this can be done. It's actually super easy. Now, first of all, let's go ahead and stop the container. So we're going to go ahead and say Docker stop and provide my Mongo 1. Okay. And we also want to run a Docker, and we want to, we'll just not prune it right now. We'll just do this later on. Right now, let's just run this. Okay, so first step is Docker run. We know this one. And we also know that we want to run Mongo. We also know that we can call this one as name, and we're going to call this one as my-mongodb. And now there is an option known as -p. Now -p is a port. This is where you actually mention that which port from the host you want to open up so that that port can interact with the port of your image or the container. Container would be right word here. So let's just say I want to interact with port 4000, and I want to go ahead and say whatever the default port of the Mongo is. Now, yes, this is something that you have to actually Google out. What is the default port for Postgres, for MySQL, for Mongo? And luckily in this case, we have just seen that. So it is 27017. All right. So this is good. So far working out good, and we want to just run this. Let's see what happens when I run that. And it says, hey, Docker run requires at least one argument, and probably I forgot to give it that. It says, hey, this failed, error connecting that. So there's so much going on wrong. So we are not able to make this one connection, connecting to the MongoDB. Okay, running a command in a new container. First, let's just verify that. We want to remove all the container because it might give us some issues. Let's see and start fresh so that we can actually understand. This is a really important command. And, oh, my bad. I forgot actually give an image to it. My bad, Mongo. Okay, notice very carefully what is happening here. Docker run is the command responsible for running the Mongo image. We are giving a name to it, and then we're also opening up a port on my machine 4000 to the machine that Mongo is giving to me. So remember, the first one is my machine, the host. I am the host, and this is the image. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And now it is giving me all of this. So I'm able to do this, but I forgot one thing. Can you mention what did I forgot? Yes, I forgot a detach mode. I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And there we go. And now I want to run this again. But when I run this time I cannot use my MongoDB. So I have to mention .1, and I have to mention this in the detach mode. So I'm going to go ahead and say -d and hit enter. Now the container is perfectly running, and it is running on a detach mode on a port 4000. The advantage of this is that I can actually use the same Mongo version and call this one as 2, and can use another port, maybe 5000, maybe 4001, whatever the port is free on your machine, I can run that. And now notice here it says port not available, exposing 4000. So there is already something on my system which is running on this 5000. I can go ahead and change this one. I'm pretty sure that 5001 might be free on my machine. There are a lot of other services running on my computer. If I run that, it says to already in use. So my bad, that container is already. So either I have to remove that. So let's go ahead and say that, hey, this is there. I want to remove this one. I'll just delete this. And yes, from the command line also you can do that. Let's hit enter. And there we go. Finally, we have two machines. One is running on 4000 and one is running on 5000. Same images, same tags, same services. So easy to do that. Now, if your application is using two or want to use two different Mongo, maybe you are using node.js, Maybe you're using Ruby on Rails, Python, whatever. One application, you can just say, hey, this is my MongoDB, name the container is MongoDB, then mention it instead of localhost, mention this my MongoDB2, and then colon 5001. That is all. That is all you have to do to run multiple images or multiple applications on different databases. How cool is that? All right, so let's go ahead and now work on with that. So I know next thing is that my machines are running, MongoDB is running, but sometimes there is something wrong there. Container seems okay as of now, but I want to really know what is happening in that container. Now this is where another command of this Docker actually gets your attention, which is Docker logs. Now this is one of the most used and important command, and there are a lot of options. Now notice here, this command, there's a lot of notes up here, but there are a lot of options here. Details, since, --tail to find out the line number above the logs and all of that. So this is a command which is super helpful, super useful to know and find out that what is happening, where it is happening. Because right now we have no interaction with the container. We can say, just because we are able to see that, okay, this is running, but what they're doing internally, what is the log? Whenever a web is making a request to that, what kind of logs my database is providing? What is the error that is coming up? So these kinds of interaction is necessary. And for that, we're going to go ahead and say Docker, and we're going to just provide a logs. And notice here, logs is really simple. We have to just say space and then provide the container name. Now I have a utility installed on my system, which actually helps me to suggest some commands. It's a fig. Right now it is only available for Mac. But I can just go ahead and say, I want to know what is happening in my MongoDB1. I go ahead and hit enter, and it gives me all the logs. That all the things that we were initially seeing without the detach mode, this is all giving me. In case your application is trying to connect with it, it will also give you that. And by the way, now you know all the options as well. Go ahead and give it a try. That maybe you want to do some follow the logs, or maybe you want to provide some restricted number of lines. Maybe you also want to show timestamp. There is some nice example that how this is going to see. Notice here they are using the busy box, and that's why a lot of tutorial also use that. It's a common thing, using the busy box. And you can provide all the outputs and everything. So this is what the basics of the logs is. Remember, log is super important. One more last thing before I get over with that. So in the logs, we can just go ahead and say Docker PS, and it gives you the ID. You can actually provide this ID as well. So for example, I can just copy this and Docker logs, and then the container ID. And a lot of time you're going to see that people actually like to use simply the Docker ID instead of the names. I find it no difference at all. Both of them are reference points toward the same container. So you call it as with the name or with the ID. It's just the same. It's like almost calling your laptop as laptop or with the serial name. I found it. Yes, of course, in some big corporate environment where hundreds of containers are there, having the serial name or the container ID is much more reliable. But we are on a tutorial. This should be easy. All right. Okay. Now we want to build. Now we know that how the Mongo can be done and all of this. Now we want to actually go ahead. First, I'll just like to prune all the containers. So notice here, we are going to go ahead and say Docker container, and we want to use the command of prune. And I'll say, do you want to remove all stopped container? Yes. So one container was deleted. Is anything else running? Yes, there are two containers which are running. I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, stop that. I'm trying to do things with a multiple different ways so that you get an idea that it's not all just command line. You can do it from here, there. It's just all the same thing. So we have stopped it from here, but I can go ahead and prune them from here. And last time we were actually deleting them from the GUI. Same thing, no such high profile thing. Hey, do everything from terminal. Wherever you feel comfortable and wherever you are achieving the job, that is what is important. All right. Now, let me show you one more interesting stuff that we're going to use in this one. So we have just seen that MongoDB is here, but there are also many images available. So there is one more image, which is known as Mongo Express. So what this is doing, it is a web-based MongoDB admin interface written with node.js and Express. So instead of we writing an application, this is an application given to us by Express people. And they are saying that, hey, obviously people want to deploy MongoDB, and MongoDB might interact with multiple applications. So here's a database and there is an application which wants to interact. A lot of tutorial works through, and in fact, one of my later portion of this tutorial worked through with how you can create an application and containerize it. But the idea behind the scene is, here is a MongoDB container. Here's a container that Express guys have written. This container is dependent on this MongoDB. So can we make a connection between them? And what can we learn by building that connection? Because right now this application is built and given to us by Express, but this could be our own application. And we might want to connect with the MongoDB. It's the same database. So this is what I loved about this section of the tutorial. You don't have to build anything. You don't have to have any of the code that you want to write. Maybe you are well versed in PHP or Java, still don't want to do it. So this is the best idea. This is a container. I have told you it is written in Express, but equally it could be written in Java, anything else. The goal is, here's the application given to you by a developer in the container format, and you want to put that or link that with the MongoDB container given to you by the MongoDB guys. Container talking to container. That is what the DevOps role is, and that is how you work on. It's the job of a developer to containerize the application in the best possible manner. Later on, in one of the YouTube videos, I'll walk you through that what could go wrong. That is also important, but right now, this is the idea. This is exactly what we want to do. The goal is simple. Connect this Mongo Express with the MongoDB. Let's see what all it has to do. It says, hey, how to use this image. You want to run it through some network. We'll walk you through with that. And then there are some of the configurations here. So me config MongoDB server, some Mongo. Notice here, when it says me config MongoDB server, it is giving a MongoDB a name. And also we need to map this up on 8081. So this is where the Mongo Express actually works on. So 8081 is the port where it actually go ahead and work on with that. So first, what we're going to go ahead and do is learn on the MongoDB, and then we are going to make it up and running, MongoDB. And then we are going to come on to the Express and we are going to make it up and running. And we will see that how or are they able to connect with each other or not. All right. So a lot of things need to come up. I'll just open up this into one more URL so that we can actually go ahead and have this container of MongoDB and can see some of the environment variables of this one. So first is Mongo. So here's the Mongo and there we go. And we can see there is a lot of references available for that and Mongo issues and all of that. And one thing I wanted to mention here is this part. Now notice here, I told you that there could be a -e for environment variable. This is another way of writing the environment. We will learn that during the Docker Compose. But here we can see that there is an admin username, there is an admin password, and then there is a connection URL also that you can mention if you wish on the environment variable. So now we want to configure a command in such a way that all these information are given to us. All right, so let's go ahead and use that. And by the way, in the MongoDB, in the Postgres, there was always a default password, my secret password. But in MongoDB, you can actually change that and provide your initial username of, like here it is has given as a root, or you can give it as an admin. Here is the password. You can give it as a simple password or an example, whatever you like. So this is what we are going to work on through that. Now also, they don't mention it, but one thing which is important, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you understand this already, is here is your MongoDB. Here is your application by Mongo Express. If they are on different network, it won't work. So we also have to keep a worry about how we can provide a same network for both of them. And this is how we're going to do this. We're going to go into the documentation and we're going to see that how we can provide an option for network. So we have just like this, we should have something like network. So let me just search for that. Otherwise I'll walk you through with that. I just wanted to show you that there should be a search option here. That would be really nice. All right, no search option. So there is a command just like in the Docker, which uses a --net to provide a network specific information, but looks like it should be here somewhere. Let me just search. Here it is. Just find out Docker network. So here you can say that we can have a network, create, and all of this. So let me just quickly have a look on the Docker network. So Docker also have this network command, and you can see there is so much more you can do in the network here as well. So just scrolling it a little bit, here it is. We can actually connect to a network. We can create a network. We can provide a Docker network create. There's a lot of option. But not only this, yes, you can go ahead and create as many network as you like, but at the time of creating an image, there is a way of creating a network. And then obviously the second image also uses the same network. We are going to use that. All right. So now that we have found enough the things in the documentation, let's try to craft this command. First, I'm all worried about is the MongoDB. So let's try to run this command. And again, we're going to use all the options. So I want to run a command which is on Mongo. This is the by default. But I don't want to just run it like that. I want to provide more option. The first option that is there in my mind is -p. Go ahead and provide. So 27017 is going to map with 27017. And by the way, you can also provide a space, provide it or not, that's same. So I'm this time not trying to give it any strange port because my application might be dependent on that, on a default port. So in this network, I'm just opening up the default port of this one. Okay. Now I just find out that there are some environment variables in the Mongo image that I really want to configure. So in the Mongo, here are a couple of environment variables. I want to copy this and want to provide them. So copy this and we're going to say -e for an environment variable. And I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, this is my me config MongoDB admin username. And the default username I'm going to go ahead and provide is admin. And then I'm going to go ahead and provide a password as well. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to use this one. The way how you provide more environment variable in the command itself is just by providing -e. So as many variable as you have to provide it. Not a good way, but yeah, this is how it works. I go ahead and provide a password. I'm going to go ahead and say equal, and I'll say password. All right. There is also one more that you can provide a URL and all this one here. We don't need this right now. I'll show you the reason why this is all, but we don't need it. I'm going to go ahead and provide more option. Notice here, we haven't yet given a name to this one. So I'm going to go ahead and say --name. And I'm going to call this one as MongoDB. There is no image right now, no container which is using it, so should be fine. If not, we'll just come back and change this one. The most important command is --net. It gives you a simple network that you can go ahead and provide this. I'm going to go ahead and call this one as simply Mongo network. All right. Now, also, you might want to run this in the detach mode. That would be really awesome. Otherwise, it will just consume entirety of the terminal. So I'll just say -d. I am pretty sure you didn't like the way. This is a really long command, not ideal way. Yes, there is a way how you can actually write this command in a file and can do better ways. But first, we need to struggle that what are the problems we are facing that other method is better than this one. So we're going to do this exact same thing in two ways. First, the tough way, not so good. And another way, which is easier way and where you can manipulate, modify these commands much easier way. All right, let's go ahead and hit enter. So notice here, it says, hey, container -e, invalid container port. So yep, my bad. I actually wrote accidentally all of this. So we're going to go ahead and remove this 270, my bad. Wrong place of the argument. So not a big deal. We can just fix it in an easy way. 27017:27017. And that is another reason why this is not a perfect way of writing the things. Hit enter, and now a container is spinned off. We would love to re-verify this. I'm going to go up here in the dashboard, and I can see that this container is running, not giving me enough information. No, it is giving me. The ports and everything are here. I can go ahead and click on this. It opens it up. It looks like you're trying to access the MongoDB or HTTP over native driver. So basically it's saying it is working. You are just trying to connect it with the browser. Not an ideal way, but it is working. It is working. So let's go back up here on the dashboard, and there we go. We can see it is all available with all the, if you want to click on view details, you can, and it will just give you all the logs, everything. GUI is not that bad. It has its reputation, but you can see that this is all it is giving us. All right. So one task is done. Now let's move on to another task. We definitely now know that this is running on a MongoDB network. So by the way, you can go ahead and click on the dashboard and can find out that this is running on the network. So I think it should come up in the view details, and it should come up here. So packages, mounts, ports. All right. And it should be somewhere here, the network information. Not sure where is it in the GUI. Never saw that. All right. So let's just assume that my network is lost. So there is a command, docker network ls. I literally lost what are the networks available. So there is a command, docker network ls, to find it out. Let's see if it helps me. So we're going to go ahead and say docker network ls. And all right, so there's a network, Mongo network, which is available to me. And yes, I'll give you on that this AppWrite and bridge and host, the bridge is default, the host is my host. And this is something that we just created. This is, you can absolutely ignore. I was making a video for the AppWrite guys. This comes from there. All right. So I know that now I have gathered the name of this network. Good. So I can see that how I can use this command. I can run the network on the same and provide a -e option of me config MongoDB server. That means I have to give the name of my MongoDB. Remember, it is not the MongoDB name. It's asking for the container name. That is what the name reference is here. And I have to run this application on port 8081. All right. But this is not all. We have to actually provide more options. It's not asking it, but remember, it just knows the name of it. It doesn't know its username. It doesn't know its password. So all these options we have to provide. All right, so let's show how we can go ahead and do this. And by the way, you can find all these options. This image is much better and the details are much better. So here it gives you all the options of admin password and username and whatnot, all the information. Now I will walk you through of writing a little bit better way of writing these images. Again, I'm not a big fan of writing it this way either, but it's a little bit better than the last one. Okay, so what we're going to go ahead and this time run this Docker Express image, Mongo Express, my bad. We're going to say Docker run, and we want to run in detach mode, and I'll just use a backslash. The moment you use backslash, it will not terminate your command, but will move you on to the next line so that you can at least see what all you are doing here. There we go. This is all great. Now, first thing we want to do is provide a port. We just saw that the -p is 8081, which is going to map at 8081. So on my machine, I have to open the browser and say 8081 is the port where I want to connect. And the second 8081, which is mentioned here, is where the application of Mongo Express is running. All right, got it? Okay, so moving further, we are also going to put a slash because I want to keep on continue writing this command. I will provide a -e option and then, -e option, then I want to give an environment variable name. So I'll just first and come for this username because we actually changed the username. If you remember, this was admin, password was password, not the strongest one, not the secure one, but we'll copy this, come back here and we'll paste it here and we'll say, hey, this is now admin. This is what we gave to the MongoDB, okay? Don't forget to put a slash, otherwise your command will break. We still want to give more environment variables, so let's go ahead and give it -e. Let's go back, the password one, copy this. There we go, and equals password. Better than the last one. This way of writing the command, still not the best way. And hit enter, make sure, don't forget slash. There we go. Now we also have to give it a server name, which I told you it's really, really important for this. And where is the server? There we go. Copy that, provide a -e, and we're going to give a server -equal. Remember very carefully, this is the container name and you have to name your container. The previous container, we called it as MongoDB. Write it exactly same to same. This is important for its networking. MongoDB. All right, don't forget the slash because we have more variables coming in. Hit enter. Let's go back onto this. Now notice here, we just studied that this actually requires you to pass on --network or --net, whatever is your favorite one. And we have to provide the network name. So our network name is really simple. Let's go back up here. Our network name was Mongo-network. So let's go ahead and say --net. And this was Mongo. Let me re-verify again, Mongo-network. Network. And again, don't forget the slash because we have more things might coming up. Okay. And we also want to give it a name. So these things you are familiar now. And we're going to call this one as Mongo-Express or My Express app, whatever the app is. And what else we want to give it? A name of the image. So the name of the image is Mongo Express. So we're going to go ahead and say Mongo-Express. So let me just go back, and this should be the name, Mongo Express. Rest of the thing hopefully are there, and should be all good. I'll still, just for the safety purpose, I'll just copy this entirety so that we don't lose it. Yes, this is what happens when you write too much of the big commands. Instead, there should be a way of putting all these things into some file so that we can have a better option. So we're going to go ahead and say Mongo Express, hit enter. Obviously, it will not be able to find this image locally. So you obviously know it will go on to the Docker Hub, and it will just try to bring the layers of all the images, and gonna just take a couple of minutes. And there we go. Now we have this newer image, which is also working. Okay, all right, let's go ahead and see into the dashboard. Okay, both of them are, this MongoDB is running, this is exited. So what is happening with this one? Why this is exited? I have no idea on that. Now, a couple of ways you can go and click on view details, and there are logs here. It says authentication failed. So there is something which we might have missed in providing the admin or the password or something. So notice here, it's a password. Probably we added an extra space, should be there. So authentication is failed. Let me check, what did we give? Did we give it a root or password? At the time we created this, we gave it an admin, and the password was password. So should be all good. Admin and password, the server is MongoDB, and Mongo network, MongoDB. Let's try it one more time. So this time we have the image, but it failed. So notice here, logs are really important. All right, so just found out the bug, and this will happen to you as well. So that is why I always say reading the documentation is important. That's where you resolve your bugs. So we accidentally actually copied the environment variables from here, which is MongoDB admin username. This is not where we should be actually setting up the environments. So this is where the environment variables are. And again, it should be written a little bit better in the MongoDB. There should be environment variables list, but it's not. So this is where we should be getting the username and password, which is root username and root password initialize time. We were not giving it. So obviously we have to actually run these commands again. Not a big deal. We can actually go ahead and do that again. So what we're going to do is open up our terminal. And before opening up the terminal, we'll just cancel that container that is running the MongoDB. So let me go ahead and move this up. So this MongoDB needs to go away. In fact, both of them can actually go away. So this container, now we can actually go ahead and delete this. So the first thing that we're going to do is we have this docker run command, which is having all these details. So we need to actually change this. So copy this, clean this, and paste it up here. Now what we're going to do is we have to remove this one up here. So let me just go ahead and first, instead of admin username and all of that, let's go ahead and copy this one. This is what we want. So there we go. Let's first go ahead and remove this admin part. So there we go. Just remove this. And yes, really bad way of writing the commands. I'll show you the easier way of doing this. And similarly, the password also should not be like that. And there is one more thing we are learning, so no worries on that part. All right, so let's remove this, go back here, and this time the password, copy that. And this time we are pasting the password. So all right, so this should be great. Now, notice we are having the initialize the root admin, and we are providing the network as well. Although we have created the network in the past, but shouldn't be a big deal. And it says, hey, invalid container port. Again, this is the same command which we had some issues. We're going to just remove this and provide the port on to place where it actually belongs. So which is 27017:27017. All right. Again, you will also fall into these kinds of problems. So very important that I also share these trouble information so that you know how to troubleshoot them. Let's go ahead and hit enter. Now a container is being created. Fantastic. Let's go ahead and work on with this long command. We're giving the same admin and password here as well. We have walked through this command in detail, in depth. Now we also have this image, so this should also be fine. Now let's see if both of the containers are running or not. We can see that both of them are running, and I can go ahead and open this up, and there we go. So this is the default way of how you are connecting with your application, and this Express application connects to your MongoDB. Let me show you and prove that to you. If I go ahead and stop this container, this will automatically close this one and we will not be able to access this. If I go ahead and stop this for a minute, notice here, this is still running, but if I go ahead and come this, because the database is not connected, it will just keep on rolling and will never connect to the database. So this proves the point that we can actually take any application, and if we somehow get a containerized version of it with proper environment variables, like what is the database URL, what is the port you're looking for, that's it. We can actually host any application, connect it to the database. That is all what we want. Now we're gonna go ahead and start this again. And now if this goes, notice here, if we reload that, instantly it comes up back. So this is the basics of how we can actually go ahead and work with that. But we realized quickly that this is not the way. This is not gonna work through, that we have all these commands writing into the terminal. This is not gonna work through. We need a proper way in which we can have a file, can write all these things into a file, and if something is wrong, we can just go there, change these things, and voila, it works fine. This is exactly where Docker Compose comes up. Right now, this is just 2 of these containers. There could be 5 containers, 10 containers, and more, which needs to be run or spinned off at the same time. This is where the Docker Compose come up. It is a simple way of creating files and running that. So we'll learn about the Docker Compose next. All right, so we saw that we can actually create multi-containers, can also interact with them each other. And it's really common that we have a database, we have an application which is talking to database, maybe multiple applications talking to database. But it would be really, really easy that if we don't have to write these long commands, if we make any mistake, go back, we can actually go ahead and easify that by using the Docker Compose. In the initial phase, I told you that there are 2 commands which we actually majorly focus, Docker and Docker Compose. So now is the time that we have a requirement of Docker Compose and we study about them. So first, obviously, we're going to go on to documentation. I know a lot of you don't like it, but this is the best way of learning anything, Docker and Docker Compose. So there is a Docker Compose CLI reference. We will be actually going through with that. So notice here, there is a new Docker Compose version 2 and all of that. We'll be studying the latest one. So this is how the Docker Compose work, that you just provide a -f option which states the file and provide it a file name. The file name is written in a specific format, the declarative format known as YAML. I do have a YAML crash course on my channel. Check that out in case you are not familiar with that. It's a declarative syntax in which you don't write too much of the code like loops and function, but rather that this is what I need, a declarative approach. And this is how all the options are here. There are a lot of options here, like for example, up. We also have the option to bring everything down, stop, and images and all of that. And here, this is how we actually go ahead and write the Docker Compose files. This is not really the best example. Although in the documentation, there is a buried down example, but don't want to bring that up. It's really buried deep down. I will walk you through personally that how we can actually write the Docker Compose based on all the files that we have studied, all the commands that we have studied. It is super easy to actually understand that. And then we'll come back onto the documentation. So I'll just minimize it. This is all. We'll also minimize this for a brief, and we don't need this guy. So what we're going to do is we're going to just simply go ahead and create a new folder here. So I'm going to go ahead, and the folder actually goes onto my other screen. Let me just go ahead and bring this up. So this new folder, actually we don't need a new folder. Let me move it to bin. Actually, we have this already folder. There we go. The DevOps folder, it's already available, in which we have the code files, which we are going to talk later on. Right now, I'll just create a new folder here, which is going to call this one as DC for Docker Compose, short form. And I would just love to fire up a VS Code. There we go. Let's drag and drop this Docker Compose into VS Code. And I prefer to use VS Code as my code editor because of a couple of reasons. One big one is the extensions. And here what we're going to do is create a new file. And feel free to call this one anything. We are going to call this one as docker-compose.yaml or YML. Whatever you like to go ahead and call it, feel free to go ahead. Now, it's not really always compulsory to call it as docker-compose.yaml. It could be really like hitesh.yaml, superman.yaml. Feel free to anything. Just call it anything. Now, one thing that I have installed on this is a rainbow indentation, which I highly, highly recommend everyone to actually go ahead and install this. So if I can find it, Indent Rainbow. So it's a plugin, Indent Rainbow. The YAML files are heavily dependent on the indentation. What comes inside one category or another component is all based on indentation. Yes, it's almost like Python, a little bit more stricter than Python. So having an indentation Rambo as your extension is super good. It will help you to make less mistake to figure out which one is inside what and all of that. So I highly recommend this extension. So go ahead and install this. By the way, there are many other options like this. I tend to use this one. So I'll just close this one and go back. So this is my Docker Compose YAML. Now, the way how the Docker Compose file works is really simple. The first thing that you always write is a version. And the version we are going to use is the 3rd version. This is the latest in the modern. You don't have to write 3 dot something. You can, but just writing a generalized version 3 is good enough. That is the step 1. Now, if you remember, we wrote 2 commands, one for Mongo, one for Mongo Express. Yes, these are containers. And we divide these containers as services. Yes, we call them as services. Service 1 is MongoDB. Service 2 is an Express container, Mongo Express. Service 3 could be something else. So this is how we go ahead and write that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write services just like that. And then this is the most important part, hit the tab. Now notice here, there's a small color highlight that comes up. This is where you write. The first one we want is MongoDB. And the second service, let's use a colon here. And the second service that I want is Mongo-Express and a colon. So these are the 2 containers that I want. Now there could be more containers that you want to write, but these are, notice here, these are all inside service. And this indentation is something that is asking you to write this. For example, there's also something known as network and volume. So these all go in the indentation level of services. So this is where you can write your network, but hit the tab. That is the most important part. We'll not talk about the network yet. We'll come back onto this one. Let's first write what are the all requirements for the MongoDB. If I bring back my terminal up, we saw that there is a lot of things here. Like for example, we have to say -p, we accidentally wrote wrong port. We also have to write these commands, these arguments. We made a mistake on this one, that's fine. And then we also need to mention the image and all of that. So we have to write all of this up here. Let's start with the MongoDB. The first that you always are going to write, again, remember there is a tab. The first thing that we write is image, and the name of the image is Mongo. Mongo. It could be latest, it could be version 3.4, whatever you like. I want to use the default Mongo. In most of the production level compose file, you're going to see that there is always a version. They don't rely on the latest one. Latest could be really dangerous one. So this is the first common option. The second option is to simply write ports. So this is how you go ahead and write your ports. And the ports is written in an array format. There could be a lot more port. So make sure you hit a tab here onto the port and then write a dash, then 1 space, and then we are going to mention the port. Notice here there is a host port and container port. This is the format that we want to use. The default, don't go with that. We want to go with 27017. On the second one is also same, 27017. So this is my host machine, and this is what the Docker Compose or the Docker container will give me. This is the basic. Now comes up the point where we made a mistake. So we'll remove the indentation because this is not inside port. This is actually environment. So we're going to go ahead and say, I want to write environment. Then you have to mention just the name and the value. So we're going to go ahead and take it from the terminal. This is the correct one that we used, username, copy that. Go back here. And the value was admin. Feel free to give it any other name value as well. I'll duplicate this one and we'll write another one, which is this. Copy that and write as many as you like, or as many developers environment variables are given to you by developers. So that is all what we have to write. Now notice here, mostly we have written here. So that is all fine. We are not going to write any network. Yes, we studied a lot about that there is a network. They should be all in network. But here's a fact. Whenever a Docker Compose comes up and all the containers that you have mentioned in the Docker container or .docker compose, right now we have 2, but there could be 5. Automatically Docker Compose creates a new network and put all of your containers in that. That is default, that is happening. You may want to write to give a specific name to that network, that is fine. But by default, all the containers that you mention in the Docker Compose shares the same network. Good information. All right, now let's go ahead. So this is all that we want as of now. And then let's go ahead and write the Mongo Express. Now again, the first thing we know that there is an image. Oops, my bad. There should be indentation. The image should be mongo-express. We studied it for really long. Then we are going to go ahead and say ports, and ports is going to be really simple. Hit a tab, then say dash, and then we want to go for 8081, and that will be mapped to 8081. So this is something that we have mentioned. Next up, remove the indentation and write the environment. And again, it's a key value pair. So let's go back here. The first is this one. So copy that and we're going to paste it up. And the admin, notice here how easy it is this time that I can just go ahead and say admin. Otherwise, mistake, you write the entire file again, entire command again, not really good. Copy that, paste this again. This time it was password. I knew that. Easy to debug also. I'll duplicate this one. The third one is the name of the server. Copy that. And I don't have to worry about. This is the name of server at line number 3. I'll copy that and paste it up here. Super easy, super easy. Okay, all right. So this is all what we need. This is still not going to work, but yeah, good enough to give it an attempt and see what is happening. Now let's go ahead and open up our terminal, and we're going to also open up this dashboard. All right. So this is what the dashboard is giving us. Let's see what is happening. Right now, these are all running. So obviously this might consume my port. So I'll just stop this one and stop this one as well. Let's see what is happening in the container world when I run this one. So obviously this is on the desktop and I have this DevOps, and inside this I have this DC, and I'll just hit enter. By doing ls, I'm able to see this file. This file could be named anything. I'm saying docker compose and then -f to give it a file name, and that is docker compose.yaml. Let's see what happens if I run it as it is. If I run it as it is, it says, hey, this is not a perfect way of running the command. And let's see what else is here. It says, hey, there is an option of -up or just directly up. It creates and start the container. Okay, we got that. That's what mistake we did. So we're going to go ahead and say up and let's hit enter. And notice here, let's study this command. This is the most important part of it. It's going to keep on doing the things, and it probably will crash or something. But the most important part is if I go really long up where it is all is happening, there we go. This is somewhat this is where we run the command. Notice here it says network DC_default. A fresh new network was created and all containers reside in that. Then it creates a container DC MongoDB1 and then the DC Mongo Express 1. So these are the name of the container. Now notice here, this is waiting for the connection, but let's see what is happening in the dashboard. This is something new. Notice here, the DC is being created here. And if I open this up, this exited while this MongoDB is running. So what is the problem? Why this exited? If I go ahead and check out the details and I check out the logs, it says, hey, Mongo network error. So there is something really wrong here, not authentication, but something really happened. Let me show you what it happened and how we can actually resolve this. Now, when you run these containers, your compose file don't know which container to run first. It could run Express first, or maybe it could run MongoDB first. But we also know that this Express is relied on the MongoDB. So MongoDB container should be up and running first, and then the Express should come into the picture. Now there is an option of, we can write that this container second Express one is dependent on MongoDB, or we can keep this Express container up and we can say that, hey, you keep on restarting unless you find a connection with the MongoDB. Both options are great. And majority of the time people will be using something like, hey, this depends on that. So for that, refer the documentation and you can find it up there. But I want to go into this Express and I want to just express one more thing here, which says, hey, I want to use a restart. And this restart is just a flag, and you can just always say always. So as soon as you mention this restart, it will keep on restarting unless it finds a connection and it doesn't terminate on its own. So there we go. Let's go ahead and try this again. So we're going to go ahead and shut it down. Remember, this container stops and everything. I can just go back again and start this again. Things are going good. And now notice here, this time it says server is open to allow connection from anyone. Basic authentication credential are admin pass. It is recommended you change. Of course, we're going to do that. But let's see what is happening here. Notice here, this time DC is still running, so we don't have to create containers and containers. Whatever is in my file, either that goes away or that comes up. So I don't have to delete the containers. It manages that thing for me for the cleanup as well. And this is running and this is also running. I can go up here and can see, oh, this is good. This is great. Now let's go ahead and just reload. It works. It works out of the box. Now let's go ahead and create a database. We're going to go ahead and create a database. Yes, I can create that. I can go into Hitesh. Let's create a new collection. So we're going to go ahead and call this one as, what should I say? YouTube. That's a great name for a collection. And this is a collection. Let's create a new document in it. And this is how it's a key value pair. So it will get an ID, something like that. In case you don't want to write any code, just click on save. It will just add a empty ID, not a good way, but it will add an empty ID here. I will also create another new document and we'll just hit enter. And I'll say that, hey, let's just say this is email and a key value pair, nothing much more than that. And we're going to just provide a string that, and we're going to say Hitesh at google.com, something like that. Fictitious email, of course. And we'll save this one. Invalid JSON, you should have a comma and save that. Now it saves the email as this field. All right, this is great. We have successfully deployed an application without writing a single line of code, and it works. Now let's go back onto terminal and we can see that the response are also coming up. That is fine. We can actually use that in the detach mode as well, but no worries. We are able to write this, all these things in text error. So logs are great. Logs are great. I'm going to kill this and see what is happening in my container world. And we can see that the DC is all exited. Fine, great. I want to run this again, so I can just go ahead and, okay, please allow that. So we are going to just remove this one and we can just click on this and run it from here as well. It will again refer to the same file. So let's just run this one. It knows where the file is. So it just starts this again and I can come back here and hit a reload and I go on to Express. It still has this Hitesh. And all the things are working fine, but let me show you that what happens when the things are here. So it says delete me, YouTube, and all of these things. So we're going to go back onto 8081. There we go. And hit a refresh. Everything is here. All right. Let me walk you through with a couple of more things. We're going to go back up here and hit a Control L. The problem with this is there's a small problem here. Let me just show you and stop this all. Now notice here, this is all being stopped. Let me walk you through. There is something now we need to study. We have studied the images and container. We have this volumes as well. Okay, some of them are in use. Okay, let's see what happens. If I go back onto this one, I'm obviously not able to link with that. If I go back onto my terminal and try to make this compose up again, it creates everything. It is now connected. I go back to the terminal, hit a refresh. I'm able to see this Hitesh again here. Why this is happening? Because in majority of the cases, you're going to see that the data doesn't persist. This is a common problem in the container. And we also can see that we can actually go ahead and run this command. Let me try to show you that. I can close this again. And if I run this command again, a couple of container command, remember we ran this command. Yep, this one. So this is my first container. I'll run this. We have to actually remove the container or have to change the command. Instead of run start, we have to do that. But given the fact, one of the biggest of the problem in the Docker world is that the data doesn't persist. That means the container is a removable item. It's a detachable item. Anything that you have mentioned or have used in that actually gets away from the container. Now, this is a good thing because if you are making any sensitive application, especially like a code engine, there you have a chance that somebody might throw up a malicious code. You have to execute that. Maybe that code might entirely corrupt your system, but you don't worry too much because it's a Docker container. Everything just goes away after that. But in this case, we want to really have this data and we want to understand what is something that is just keeping this data. Now for this, we are going to understand about the Docker volume. Now this Docker desktop sometimes, in fact, most of the time creates an automatic volume for you, especially for the databases that, hey, I'm pretty sure you might want to have this database. You want to keep it there. So that is why it is up here. Now, this is where something interesting comes into the picture. Now, I actually ran all of this before recording this video. That is why this persistence is coming up. but I'll show you that how actually you can go ahead and do this. I'll open up the VS Code. There we go. And one more thing we can mention, just like we have services, is the volumes. So we're going to go ahead and say, hey, we want to keep a volumes as well. Just hit a tab and we're going to call this one volume as, let's just call this as mongo-data. And then this is the syntax, hit enter, hit a tab, and then say driver:local. So basically it's saying that, hey, I'm not using anything fancy. It's just a local drivers to have a data. Mongo. There we go. Now, wherever your database lies, because remember, this is not something which is persistent. This is what we want to make persistent. We can go ahead and hit an enter here. And then we can go ahead and say, I would like to change this name. Instead of Mongo data, I'm going to call this one as my Mongo data, because I actually used this same example in testing out before recording this video. I'll come up here, make sure this is on the same indentation level. This is the common mistake. We're going to go ahead and say volumes, and then you can mention as many volumes as you want to use. And notice here, the volume that we want to use this time is this my Mongo data. So you have to just copy this and paste it up here. So now this is using, and then use a colon. Now this is container path. That means I have given a name to the volume that, hey, this is the name of the volume. Otherwise, you have seen that how ridiculous the name actually comes up in the volumes. Yeah, this could be like anything. This could be anything. You have no idea about the ID. So better to give these volumes a name, at least in our file. So that I can actually refer this. Now, whenever a new container is deployed of MongoDB or Postgres, there is a specific path only which these containers or these database store all the values. So we are saying that, hey, I am giving you a volume which will be permanent regardless that container goes or not. It will always be there. And I'm calling this as my Mongo data. So whenever this should be mounted up in the container, use this MongoDB data. And where it should mount it, /data/db. Now this is a default path of MongoDB. This is a different path for Postgres. This is a different path for MySQL. So make sure you know that where you are actually going ahead and doing this. Once I save this and I go back onto terminal and I run this Docker compose again, let's go ahead and spin this up, and this will keep on starting until it was able to actually connect all this. So basically now it is all connected, and I go on to this localhost, hit a reload. Notice this time it is gone because I have mounted a different volume, and this is the default behavior because randomly it might generate a new volume for your container, and there is no persistence of the data. What I can do now is I can just go ahead and create simply my Hitesh as a new database table or document in this case. And I can go ahead and say that, hey, just there is a delete me, there is a view collection name. I'm going to call this one as test call for cool. That is also good. And there we go. We have a data persistence here, which is creating the volume like that. Let's create a new document, save that, and there we go. Now, even if we stop the container, we can actually go ahead and stop this. And we can map it up to different volumes. That is also possible. So if I go ahead and stop this, obviously I don't have anything. So it is gone. And I can go ahead and try to make it up again. And this will be up in a second. There we go. And I hit reload. And this Mongo database is always going to be there. Now, giving you the fact, also want to demonstrate something else. Let's just say this time you are not calling it as my Mongo-data. Let's just say we call it as something different, data-1. So this is obviously a different volume that you are creating. So now this file will be loaded up. So we're going to go ahead and change this name for the fun sake. Save that, go back onto this. Obviously this needs to stop. We're going to make this up and running. And this should be up within a minute. And anytime now. Come on. There we go. I go back onto this and I hit a reload. And there we go. This is gone now. I'm going to go back here and notice the fun. I'm going to create a fun database. I'm not going to do anything inside this, but I can go back onto this VS Code and I can say that instead of my Mongo data-1, I'm going to go ahead and say, I want to connect with this original one. So you have a volume which is permanently saved, and I can go back, hit a Control C, start that again. anytime now, and we can go on to browser, hit a reload. You get the idea. This is the data persistence. And yes, data persistent, you can study a little bit more so that all of your files, code files, and everything can also be stored. So this is the basics of how the Docker Compose work. Obviously, you should more, and again, it is also one more thing I want to mention before we actually go ahead. You can hit Control C, but Control C actually doesn't close anything. You can see that still into the containers, we have this DC. There is also a similar command here which says Docker Compose, and you can bring everything down. Hit enter and it will remove the network and everything. And notice here, all the things are gone. So this is the basics of how Docker works. And remember, we have not coded a single line in Python, in Java, in JavaScript, in Ruby, or anything else. And we do understand that how the database works, what could be the connection, what could be the connection string, what could go wrong, how to introduce environment variable and everything without touching a single line of code. That was the goal with this course. Now, a couple of more things I would like to mention here before you go up onto different exploration of exercise and projects. I'll include 2 projects here in this video as well, which will be how you can actually containerize a Python application, how you can containerize JavaScript application as well, and maybe I'll explore more in the future as well. So this is the basics that we are going to go through. One more thing before we go ahead and work on with that. In the later on videos, or this section, same section of the videos, I'll introduce you that how you can push these images onto the system. That will also give you a more clarity towards the code perspective, that how we can write the basic bare minimum code. It can expose our application on certain port, and that can be containerized. And if there is a database connection in that application, this is exactly what you can do to connect that with the network database available in the container. So really, this is a big picture overview, and I hope this sort of crash course has helped you. Now, this is something I want to mention, just one last thing, is you can create the repositories. These are public repositories that you can mention, but also want to mention that this is not the only way of how you can actually go ahead and pull the Docker Hub or Docker repositories. The default is mentioning the Docker Hub or Docker repositories, but AWS also provides you a Docker registry, which you can use, a Amazon Elastic container. You can host your images here as well. There are a lot more options. It's not like just the Docker. Docker is the most common first one and the public one which is available and the default one, but there is no shortage of such container registries. Most of the companies like to keep such images to them, privatized themselves, and they use mostly Amazon or Azure and all these cloud services to actually do that. Rest of the thing remains same. So your Docker, Docker Compose, containerization and all of that, that remains same. So this is how it works. This was only the important information I want to mention. Now, all those who have understood and studied this far, congratulations. Yeah, you now all know about the Docker in and out. Now, the next videos are something which is going to help you to Dockerize and push your application image onto the Docker Hub, both in JavaScript and in Python. I hope you're excited. Go ahead, hit that like button and subscribe as well in case you have enjoyed the content. I'll definitely bring more such exhaustive, lengthy, and meaningful content for all of you. That's it for this video. Let's catch up in the next one. Hey there everyone, Tesh here, back again with another video, and in this video we're going to see that how we can convert a Flask app which is made in Python in a Docker image. Now this is a really basic Flask app that we have created, which obviously runs on a web and just give us a hey message, hey Python. Now Flask is one of the most easiest way of how you can build a simple Python application on the web or maybe just APIs. And yes, there are other ways like Fast API and Django, and a lot of database could be involved, but slowly, baby steps. We're moving through the journey of going through with the Docker. So this is the most easiest one. The whole idea behind creating these kinds of videos is so that you understand a little bit journey about the DevOps, and sometimes you even want to know that I don't really understand what is the business logic in these applications that developers has coded. I just need the bare minimum information, and via that information, I can make a container or I can make an image out of any application, whether that's coded in JavaScript or in Python. Let's just assume I don't know Python. Let's just assume I don't know even a tiny bit of Java, and still I'll be able to host these applications. The today's turn in this specific video is for Python Flask application. Let's go ahead and see how we can do that. This is one of the most easiest one that you can do. So I don't even need to check what's there inside the index.py. The first thing that is important for me is the requirement. What are the requirements for these applications? Now, this is where you actually go ahead and interact with your developer. He says, hey, this is a basic Flask app, which needs to run on the port 3000. That's all I care, and that's all I really want to know. I don't know what it produces as an output, what success and all of that. That's the developer role. We just want to put this application as an image, and obviously we want to push it onto the Docker Hub just for fun. Okay, all right. So first thing we're going to do is simply go ahead and say Docker file. So that's what we want. Now, in this case, this is a Python image. So we want to take a base image, which is going to be a Python image. Now, there are a lot of Python images available, both for version 2 and 3, but obviously this is a Python 3 version that we want to call up. So really simple, we start with the base image, always and always with the base image. So the base image in this case, we are going to go ahead with Python. I'm going to hit Control space and it can give me a lot of suggestions. So I'm going to go ahead, put colon, then again hit Control space. And gives me a lot of versions of these images. So in a minute, there we go. We have a lot of version of Python 2. I'm not interested in that. I'm version 3. That is where I'm interested. And you can see from 3.16 to 3.15, a lot of version. 3.16 seems a little bit too much updated for me. So I'm going to go with Alpine 3.15. Alpine is nothing, just a stripped down version. A little bit lower in the size, but again, depends on what kind of Python is being used in your application. You really want to consult with your developer a little bit on that. All right. So this is the basic. Then what we do is really the basic. This remains common in most of the applications. So we define the working directory. You can put it just in the slash, but it is not a good idea. So you always want to have a directory because this is like an operating system, almost like, and in that, the slash is very sensitive directory. So you want to create a new directory, just like you have a desktop, something like that is there. So we do just the app, and it doesn't need to be always like app. It could be just Hitesh, but Hitesh doesn't seem great. App is actually much better. Then we go ahead and simply say that, hey, we want to copy and copy some information. There are ways how you can copy, then run the command, then can copy rest over the files. These are caching and all these optimization. We don't want to go into that as of now. We simply want to say, hey, copy everything that you have and just go ahead and put it into /app. So that's it. We defined a working directory. We move all of our files into that working directory. That's what the basic of this image does. Then obviously we need to run some command because when you take an image, which is based on Python, it is based on Python. The Python is installed in that, but all the requirements like Flask, maybe Django or something else is not present in that. So we need to install that. So we go ahead and run the command. In case your company or you deal with a lot of Python command, you should run these few of these commands. The first one is actually pip install. And then we pass on a flag of -r, which gives all the requirement in a file. So which is going to be requirements.txt, and make sure you don't do typo because I do a lot. Requirements should be the exact same file, requirements.txt. So make sure you take care of that. Once this is done, that means in a new image, which is based out of Python, all the files have been copied, all the requirements are also done. The only thing which for this basic Flask app remains is exposing the port and then finally running the app. So let's go ahead and see that. We have seen that in the last video as well. We can go ahead and say, hey, expose 3000. It always doesn't need to be 3000. It could be 5000, 8000, whatever the port makes sense. You want to expose out of that machine or an image, you can go ahead and do that. And finally, you have to fire up a command. We'll talk more about these in the series itself of the Docker. By the way, I do already have an existing series, but I want to freshen it up. So we're going to go ahead and have some command, and the command is really simple. It's just a Python file which we want to run in the same directory. Remember, we have already mentioned our working directory. That's where all the things happen. We'll say /index.py. So we want to run this base file, and based on that, there could be 100 other files and dependencies or all that. This is the entry point we want to mention. Once you do this, that's it. That's your basic Docker file. Not too much of the command. Obviously, as the complexity begins to increase, maybe that's a Django file, just basic SQLite, or maybe Postgres is involved, maybe MongoDB is involved. There's a lot of things that can come up again. And based on that, we have other files, even spoiler alert, Docker Compose is there, but we don't want to talk them right now, at least in this video. But this is all what you have to do. This is a great exercise to build up a lot of images and all of this. By the way, in case you want to go for that, here's a basic Python file, or you can just go for, here's the basic Python file. You can pause and write that, but I don't recommend this. I recommend you to go on to the Flask documentation. Let me just show you that. Actually, it's super easy. Let me just go ahead and open this up. So if you go ahead on to Google and just say flask hello world, you can just go up into a lot of files are there, even the Flask quick start documentation. A lot of great websites are there which actually helps you out there. We'll go on to the Flask getting started, and there it will give you the documentation of how you can get started with the basic application. So notice here, this is all you need to copy. This is the route slash on which hello world is being defined, and you are just running it. And that's basically it. It can do all the job for you. There is additionally a couple of more lines that you can write. But this is all you need. In case you are not able to find or don't want to write it, just go get it up here. That's all. That's all you need for the practice purpose. In case you are seasoned in Python, you want to write a couple of more lines of code like if and all of that, that's fine. If you don't write it, that is also fine. Flask actually works without this as well. All right, so we got this one. Now let's go ahead and try to build this as an image. In case you have followed the last video where I showed you how you can build images using the node.js, this is almost going to be similar with that, but I'll show you that. Again, the requirement is you should have Docker installed in that on your machine at least. So the way how we do it is simply say Docker, we pass on a command to build, and then we pass on a -t. The -t is to give you a tag, and I always prefer that my tag should be something which comes up from hub.docker.com and your username. In my case, I've already logged into this, so I can check my profile, and this gives me my username. So this is hey node.js, we pushed it in the last video, and this is my username. So I go up here and I say that, hey, I want to tag it first with my username, then whatever the name you want to probably define here. So in this case, I would like to say, hey -python. Python Flask would be better because I do have a plan to push up more Python projects and show you more example with the Django and a couple of others as well, but no promises on that. And this is the basics. Hey Python Flask. So this is the app. Now again, we'll talk about these tags. You can go ahead and say latest. This is the default tag that when you pull the image, it pulls up. But if you don't want to pass it on because we'll be incrementally updating it, you can go ahead and say classic 0.0.1.release. Again, if you don't pass on anything, pass on latest. That's a default tag, but you can go ahead and pass on this as well. Once you have done this, the most important part is put up a dot. This dot defines that the Docker file based on which this image should be created is available in the current directory, which is Docker file. Now, if I go ahead and show you my dashboard on the Docker desktop, in the image, we have just the hey node.js. With the tag itself, we'll be creating another one. I can go ahead and show you by refreshing it. Nothing is there. And we can go ahead, hit run this. And this is going to take just a few seconds because it's not a big image on that. Depends on your internet speed as well, but I think it should be fairly easy. And now we have got this basics up here, copied and all of that. So I should have another image in theory at least. So there we go, Python, hey Python Flask, and we have got the same tags and release and all of that. So now what I want to do is I want to run this image first because before pushing it to hub, I obviously want to check out whether this actually works or not. So to run that, all I can say is Docker container, and then I can run this app with a -d, which stands for detach mode. Hey, don't keep my terminal busy, give me my terminal back, and you keep it running in the background. And then we obviously need to expose the port because it's a web application, runs on a certain port. And I would say, hey, in the Docker, the 3000 port it's we're running. And on my main machine, I can be saying 4000 or I can say 3000, wherever you want to map those ports together. And then obviously I have to mention these name, which says, hey Python Flask. And I have to give it the version because otherwise it pulls up as this default. I haven't given that. So I'll say 0. Oops, my bad. Accidentally hit enter. Okay, we're gonna say 0.1 dot release. That's a long one. And then all I have to do is hit enter after that. So I'm gonna hit enter. And this is supposedly, in theory, if it is all correct, is going to run a container behind the scene for me and will be exposing a port on my main machine. It's taking a little bit while. Probably did I hit enter something wrong? Let's try to find out where it is going wrong. Right now, nothing. And the image is there. All right. Let's wait for a couple of seconds. Did I accidentally run some command wrong? All right. Let's actually close this and let me open it up as a full screen so that we can actually borrow this name. Maybe I did accidentally type something wrong. Okay, all right, one more time. This happens to every one of us. Docker container, we want to run the container. We are saying, hey, run it in detach mode with a port exposed of 3000, and we'll map 3000 on our real machine as well. And then I'll paste this one as it is. And after a space, I'll hit enter, and there we go. This time it works. Probably I mistyped something. I'm sure here, or probably here. I don't know where. Okay, so this is now running, and I can verify that by saying docker container, and I can say ls, small for listing down. So there we go, container is running. Now let's quickly check on port 3000 whether we are getting, hey Python this time. Great. But what if I want to stop this? So I'm going to go ahead and say docker container stop, and I want to stop 076F. So I want to stop that. I want to run this command again, but this time I don't want it to run on my main machine for 3000. All right. A small glitch, and now it's recording back. So, okay. So what we're trying to do is we were trying to just change the port here. So let's go ahead and say, we're going to go ahead and run this docker container, and we want to just quick ls, nothing so far. And we want to run this. So we're going to say docker container run. And what we want to do is run in the detach mode with a -p option. And we initially went through with the 3000, but on my main machine, now I want to expose 4000 port. But on the container, it's always 3000. That's what we mapped while building this image. So that should be fine. And now we simply go ahead and mention that, hey, this is the image that we want to run. And that's it. So it gives us a 97C. So let's go back up here. So if I go ahead and check it out, this is where recording stopped. 3000, nothing is there. And if I go ahead and say 4000, there we go. So you got the idea. This first one is my machine port. This is the image port. I cannot change it once the image is being built. But yeah, I got the idea that how this is being done. So let's go ahead and say docker container stop. And I want to stop 99, and I can just run. No such container 90 or 97, my bad, 97. Okay, all right. So now all the containers should be freed up. This means I can push this particular image onto the Docker Hub so that anybody can use it. I'm going to go ahead and say docker push, and I'll name this one same. I'll say that Hitesh, my username. And then all I have to do is, actually I can copy and paste this one. I've already got this as my clipboard. So there we go. So this is my username, and this is what I want to call my image. And of course, you have to pull in the tag with this exact release. Otherwise, if I just say it :latest, then it will pull the latest. But this incremental update will help us later on as we'll be studying the Docker. So this is the basics. Let's try hit that. And obviously, it will take a little bit time. Not much, but a little bit. Can we do a fast forwarding in the editing? I think yes. All right, so finally it's being pushed, and let's go back and see onto the Docker Hub whether we got Python as Flask. And there we go. All right, we can see that hey Python Flask is now available, and we can see that. There we go. Anybody can use this one. Of course, they also have to use the tag, this tag exactly, and this will help to get them this file. All right. So again, you noticed here that as a Docker or as a DevOps engineer, you don't have to too much worry about what's happening, what is the business logic and all of that. You were just responsible for creating the image. And as you will move forward, you will realize that this is the image that somebody needs to give you, and you can run as many containers as you like of this exact image without worrying about what's the business logic, what's this. But again, yeah, this much of the piece you need to write, and this is mostly available on the internet, on the documentation, or through such YouTube videos, which I'm pretty sure you're going to subscribe as well. That's it for this one. Let's go ahead and catch up in next video. Hey there everyone, Tesh here, back again with another video, and in this video you are going to see that how can I make a simple node.js endpoint in the REST API, and how can I dockerize it and push that image onto the Docker Hub. Remember a couple of keywords here. I didn't say that you will learn, I just said you will watch it, because this is not a tutorial. Okay, Tesh, if this is not a tutorial, why does this video exist? Now, in the later on upcoming few weeks, I really wanted to make a playlist about the Docker as well as on Kubernetes, and this is a preparation material for that. I thought, why to make a preparation material behind the scene? Why not to just record that and also push it onto YouTube so that at least you can learn something from it. A big wider note on this one is this video is not about the caching of the images. Those who already know the Docker, I won't be showing you the caching because that's a part of later on videos. And yes, despite saying this, there will be left and right comment under this video that, hey, this is not the optimized way. You're not caching. It's not about that. I wanted to prepare some images so that later on I can use them for teaching the Docker. And this is a part of that video. Again, a couple of similar videos will also be coming up on the channel. These are all preparation material for the upcoming Docker series. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get started. In case you want to follow that, yes, you will be able to completely follow this along. This tutorial or this watching video will give you a lot of insight as well as some of the confidence about that. Yes, I can also do it. So let's go ahead. Enough of the theory talk. Let's go ahead and write some code and fun stuff. So first and foremost, in order to follow along with me in this video, you first need to install Docker on your system. Now, Docker installation is not a big deal anymore. It's really simple. You can just install the Docker desktop. It's available for almost everything that you want. If I go ahead into the guides, I quickly see that there is a getting started guide and there is a whole lot of things that you can do with that. The easiest one is to go into the manual and I want to install the Docker. Where do you want to install it? On a Mac, on a Windows, or all in a Linux system? That's all the guides are available. It's just a matter of next. In case you are on Linux, that is also super easy. For example, on Windows, here is the desktop for Windows, just next. And again, they are also mentioning system requirement for if you want to go with Hyper-V, which is the default one. If you want to go with WSL2 backed, they give you all the guides. So you can also use some command line utilities like Chocolatey and stuff and can install that on Windows. So regardless how you do it, it's a pretty simple install. You get this application here. Same for the Linux as well. It's available in a couple of flavors, the most popular ones. Of course, it cannot be available for everyone. And Ubuntu, the most famous one, here is the uninstallation prerequisites, and here is how you install it. That's all it is, and then you can just run the Docker version. So regardless of how you install that, you are going to require a Docker in your system. If I go ahead and fire up my terminal app, I should be allowed to have a simple docker -v or version. And yep, if this looks like something like this, then yes, you have the Docker installed. It says, how can I find the Docker version? That should be here. So there's a lot of commands available. As long as you get something like this, then it should be all okay. Let me try out with the docker -v. Yep, correct. So Docker version, regardless of what version is installed in the system, you should have a Docker version. Now, apart from this, since we are going to be pushing a JavaScript-based API onto a Docker Hub and we'll be creating an image based on that, you're also going to require some Node.js, 18, 19, whatever the version suits you. Just go ahead and install that. I'm going to go ahead and say node-v, and it gives me a version 16, and I'll update this. I'll update this very soon, but this is okay. This is totally fine with that. So any version should be fine. All right, so this is the basics. You should have both of them installed. Now, I also have this Docker up and running here. So this is how it runs these days. So if I go ahead up here, this is freshened up. I have removed all the things. We have nothing in the container. All the images has been pruned out, and volumes is also wiped out. So there is nothing right now. We want to learn, or we definitely want to create some of the code pieces. Now again, the series that I want to make in the upcoming days, it's not going to be a coding series, but rather a DevOps friendly series where we focus more on Docker and Kubernetes. So writing part of the code is just because I wanted to make an end-to-end tutorial. You don't want to download some files from there or something. So instead of that, we're going to be writing everything on our own. So that's what we'll be doing. Okay, all right. Let me fire up my VS Code. Here we go. And I have this folder devops, and I'm going to go ahead and call this one as simply code files. Yeah, because a couple of code files are going to be coming in. I'll be creating a couple of more series or videos on this one. I'm going to call this one as hey node.js, and let's drag and drop this one. All right, looks pretty good. So far, nothing really complicated. All right, full screen. There we go, nice and easy. Now I want to open up my terminal. In case you don't know how to open that, that should be pretty easy. Just click on view and you can open up the terminal. This is an inbuilt terminal. The advantage is I don't have to traverse into directories and CDs and all of that. I don't have to do that. And now first thing is we are going to start npm. So we're going to say npm init. npm is something that comes up with the node.js. So that should be fine. And we also want to give a flag of -y so that it should not be keep on asking us, hey, do you want this or that and all of that. It just creates a package.json file, couple of editings that we are going to do in this file. The first one is we're going to replace this start test with a start, and we are going to replace this entire thing with node index.js. All right. The reason why we are doing it is simply because in the main, it's already written as index.js. This is the main file, and we want to run that through the node utility. So obviously we need to create an index file. So we're going to go ahead and say index.js. Now we're going to be creating a couple of files and folders, and we're going to remove them as well. Yes, we can create the Docker ignore file, but that's for a later on tutorial. Right now we want to go through this path. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is install a package. So that will help us to create the APIs, and we're going to go ahead and say npm install, and we're going to go ahead and install Express. Now Express will help us to quickly create the REST APIs, and we don't know much about the Express. Let's just assume that. We're going to go ahead and say Express npm documentation would be always a good idea. All right. So everything is going to come up from the documentation, from the getting started guide. So how to write a hello world in this one. And this is exactly what they say is how you write the hello world. All right, let me just copy this. We are going to copy this and we'll come back here. We'll just paste it out. That's all what we are doing. So you don't need to learn that how this code actually works, but you should have a fairly brief idea of what this application is about. The complex business logic is for the developers, not for the people who are in operations or in DevOps. You just need to know this is going to run on port 3000. This is common for every Node.js application, not the port, but the syntax of how it works. There is always a port. There is always some kind of node environment that you have to create. That's the basics of it. Same goes for Python and for Java as well. They have their own kind of a common things that you always have to kind of do. And that's what we are learning or will be learning in the future. So what we're going to do is we are going to just modify this a little bit so that it looks a little bit good. So what we're going to do is instead of saying res.send, let's go ahead and throw up a JSON response and remove this hello world. I don't like that. I'll just go ahead and say this will be saying something like, hey, and we're going to go ahead and say node.js. All right. And this is the basics. We don't need to make this application any more complex, but just like we have given here a slash so that the default application will throw us a response of hey node.js, we can create more routes. But I think for this application, creating more routes is just going to create some more complexity for the operations perspective for the people who are not interested in the coding part. So we're going to just keep it as it is. All right. So this is the basics of it, and the application works. In order to test this out, all we can do is, remember in the package.json, we have run this start command. So we can actually use this, or we can just directly write node. So we're going to be running a command which is more friendly. Let's go ahead and say that I want to say node index.js. Example app is listening on port 3000. So that's great. Let's go up here and say that, hey, I want to listen on localhost 3000. and it says, hey, node.js. That's all. The testing is done. So let's go ahead and stop this. Now, couple of things. Now, yes, we are going to learn the best ways later on. Right now, the first thing I want to do is right click on the node modules and delete this. Again, yes, there are better ways. I just want to make this application a little bit simpler to follow and some confidence in you so that you can actually push this image onto the Docker Hub. Applications are important, but confidence is equally important. Let's create a new file and call this one as Docker file, and that's it. Your VS Code might ask you to install a couple of extensions. Go ahead and install that. These are always a great idea. Before I go ahead and do this, also, you should visit hub.docker.com. And once you visit this, this will ask you to create an account. Go ahead and create an account. My account is a little bit older one. And I published one image, Hello Crow, 4 years ago. Now we'll be publishing a few more images for the upcoming series. So you can just click on this, my profile, and all the repositories or anything images that you have pushed will be available here. Remember, you have to go ahead and log in into this one. So create an account. After this, from the terminal itself, you have to just run a command that says docker login. Once you do this, this will take you on the browser and you have to use the same credentials that you have used for creating the account, and you'll be logged in into the terminal of your computer. That's all you have to do. Now, here comes the operation part. In the world of operations, people don't write too much of the code, but they have to write the minimalistic code that is not basically a code, but more of rather a configuration file, a syntactical file that helps them to push the code, entirety of the code, zip them up and push it somewhere. In this case, the zip is actually an image that can be utilized on multiple platforms, on our local system, on AWS, on Google Cloud. A lot of places this code is going to be used. Now, the best part is, as long as developers knows the bits and basics of how to create these images, as an operation guy or a DevOps guy, you don't have to really worry about whether this application is being built in Python or Node.js. We rarely care as a DevOps engineer. So let's go ahead and see that. This is something which is done usually by developers of creating an image, but as a DevOps engineer, you should also know bits and pieces of it. Now, the first step is to have a from. Now, this from is going to just simply say from where do you want to take your base image. Now, base image is something which is available on the Docker Hub. For example, I can just look for a Node.js image, and you're going to see there is a lot of Node.js images, Node.js agent and whatnot, and all of these. I just look for a node image. Yep, that's what I want to look. And if you look up for the tags, I'll explain these tags later on. There's the latest, there's a slim version, there is a hydrogen version, buster slim and whatnot. The only difference is that the latest one is of 353 MB and the slim version is 75 MB. So quite good one. Depends on what's your use case. Do you want to rely just on the basic core components of Node, or your application consumes a lot more than Node and all the packages that it offers? So from where we pick up a base image. And I'll walk you through what this base image is later on. But right now, just assume it has enough of the components of OS and networking and the application that it is going to successfully run your application. So we're going to go ahead and say that I want a node image. And if you have installed the Docker extension, then you can go ahead and put up a colon and press Control and space, and it's going to load that what all images are available. Right now it says loading, but within a few seconds, there we go. We have a lot of images available, and you can see the scroll bar. This goes like pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and just use the slim version. So it's automatically going to pick up the latest slim version. Not a great idea. You should be mentioning the version number, but yeah, I give you on that. We are just explicitly doing it. The next step is to define your working directory. That since this is a container image, everything is going to go in some place. So we have to define that. I'll just call this one as /app. Feel free to call it even at a /. Slash is not a good idea to run your application, so have it in some folder, /app, /atesh, /YouTube, wherever you want to have this one. Now we are going to go ahead and copy from source to destination. Source is current directory, so I'll just say dot. This is a shorthand for picking up all the files from the current directory. That's why we deleted node modules, because we want to copy that over. We don't want to do that. Yes, we could have created a Docker ignore file, but we'll talk about them later on. To the destination, we want to copy all the files into /app. And yes, this is the exact point where people will be shouting at the comment section, hey, we should copy package.json. We will talk about the caching later on. Right now, you can ignore that. And then we're going to go ahead and run some command. The reason for that is that we want to run the command npm install is along with just the package.json, it doesn't work. It needs the node module directories. Since we have removed it, and when we will be copying these files into the Docker images, this won't be there. So in order to repopulate that, this is the command that we use, npm install. This will bring back the node module folders back. So once this is back, that means our application is looking absolutely fantastic. Just one tiny more thing which you should be worried about is notice our application is running on port 3000. Right now, this Docker is like, it's not good to say, but it's almost like a virtual machine. Yes, I know a lot of people will be bashing me on the comments. It's not a virtual machine. Okay, let's assume right now that it is almost a virtual machine. Right now, there is no port exposed out of it. So we need to expose a port so that we can see what's running in that machine. I know. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say expose, and the port is 3000. All right, now final thing is the command, because your application is installed, copied, node module folder is created. But remember, we actually ran our application by running the command node index.js. And this is exactly the command. And yes, there are a couple of ways how we can write the command, better ways, bad ways. We'll talk about them later on. And this is it. This is all the development part that as a DevOps engineer you usually do. And even not that much. This is usually given to you as an image by the developer itself. And that's why we call the DevOps as a contribution from developer comes up, a contribution from operation guy comes up, and we build an ecosystem and environment for that. So this is the basics of how a Docker file is being created. Now, this is all done. This is all the programmatic part of the Docker. Now we can just close all of this and can go into the terminal. Now, here comes the best part. Now we're going to use a few Docker commands to first build an image. The image will be based on the configuration that we have mentioned in the Docker file. This will be utilized. It's not perfect, it's not being cached, but it is. And the goal is to build an image, also to make sure that that image runs. We need to run that. Once we have run that, we'll stop that image and we'll push this image onto Docker Hub so that anybody can pull this image and at least can run the basic application that we have created here. All right, let's go ahead. So what we're going to do is first, it's really simple. We're going to say that, hey, Docker, I want to build something. And in the build, we are going to provide a -t as well. Now, why -t? -t is a tag option. You can go ahead and use without t as well, and it will give you a random name, which is not good. It will be not really great. We want to use -t. Now, a little bit more of a stuff. So let me go ahead and walk you through here onto the Docker Hub. Now, when you go onto the Docker Hub, let me go ahead and move on to the Docker Hub. If you remember, there is always your profile name, whatever the name you have chosen. So if in case I check for my profile, there is /u and then your name. This is your profile name. And if you tag your images here, that means anybody can pull your images. So let me walk you through with an old image. Anybody can pull my image by running the command docker pull and then my name, that is my username. It will be different for you when you will be creating accounts. So make sure you mention that. And then after that, whatever you have named your image. In my case, I said Hello Crow, but in this case, I want to say something different. All of your images will be tagged as your profile name and then a slash and then like this. We want to follow the same kind of a thing. All right, so let's go up here. So we're going to say that I want to tag all of my images with my username and then whatever the name you want to give. I want to call this one as hey node.js. Now this is it. This is good, but eventually there might be some incremental updates in the images and all of that. And for that, the Docker actually gives you a couple of more options. When we search for this node, in case you might have noticed, there are tags, and these are the tags that are available up here. So notice here, latest, it's slim, and there are a lot of versions on top of that. If I click on this one, I'll show you that there are a lot of versions available up here, numbers and long SHA values and whatnot. We want to follow the same kind of a convention here that we want to tag our images, something like that. Okay, how we can do that? It's totally up to you how you want to tag them. The easiest way is to call this one as 0. And again, my bad. We need to call this one as .0. So my bad. And then say 0.0.0. And this is the basics of how you start your application. And eventually you make an increment of .1, .2 like that. And I've already made a video about that how these versionings are being tracked in the NPM, details about NPM. But right now we want to go just the one because this is the basic. And we want to call it as, this is a Docker convention dot release. And yes, you don't need to do it. This part is totally optional. You can just call it as :latest, which automatically gets up there. Or you can just call it as 0.0.1. That is also fine. But in all of the tutorials, in all of the documentation, this is a convention that we want to use. So I'll just go with that. All right. So this is my basic. Now, one more thing, put up a space and just mention a dot. All right. Why this dot? This dot is to mention that the Docker file based on which you have to create this image or build this image is available in the current directory. Yes, in the world of Docker, everything which is in the current directory is not mentioned as /, but just the dot, in case you're coming up from a programming background. So this is the dot. That means, hey, if you're going to look for it, the Docker file is just right there. And this is exactly what we want. Now, as soon as I hit enter, this is going to take some time. Although we have used the Node Slim version, but this is going to take some time because it runs the npm install, which also takes a little bit time and all of that. Your system might take a little bit more time than what I have. Okay. Now, a couple of things. We can go ahead and run a couple of commands, something like docker container, and we can do a quick ls that, hey, how many containers are there? Right now we can see no container ID, no image, no command, no created. So it's empty. It's flushed out. Everything is all gone. Now we want to run this. We want to check that whether we have image or not. Now just quick note, I can just click on this and click on the dashboard. And in the dashboard, if I check out the images, notice there is one image. Now, yes, there is a command line way of doing that as well. But we have seen that this image, pretty big, but it is available now. And this is entirety of my code. I don't have to worry about environment, what to install, Ubuntu, nothing. It is just all there. Now, if this image is there, I would love to run this image. So let's go ahead and run a couple of more commands. We're going to go ahead and say docker container, and we're going to say, hey, I want to run an image, but I want to run it in the detach mode. -d is the option, or you can write -- detach. What it does, it frees up your terminal. That's it. Otherwise, your terminal is busy. If you write -d, you can do much stuff. It keeps things in the background. And the most important part is -p. That means, hey, I want to free up a port. And notice on this machine, I have the port 3000. I want to bind it from the Docker port of 3000. Now, if the Docker port would be 5000, I would say, hey, 5000, we can mismatch the ports as well. No big deal. Let's just say in our machine, 3000 is busy. I will just free up 3001. Totally up to you, how you want to do it. I will talk about them later on, but this is all the basics. Okay, all right, this is all good. Now, what image you want to run? I want to run this image, which is this. But remember, this is not all that we have. Remember, we said, hey, we want a specific version of the image, which is 0.0.1. And then we say dot release. And yes, release. And yes, you have to provide the entirety of the name and versions and all of that. And again, by the way, if you want to cheat a little bit, go ahead into dashboard and look for this one. You have to mention this tag 0.0.1.release. In case you haven't mentioned this, there's the tag latest already given to you. So this is the basics, and let's just hit a space and hit an enter. Now it gives us a really long string back, which is a SHA value. Again, don't worry about this. We just want to run the command docker container ls. Now this time Docker says, hey, there is a port ID. Remember, they always gives you just a couple of words because, hey, who wants to write this big? And the name of the image is here. And it says, hey, everything is running, and it has also exposed a port for you. Now, if I go back and try to see on the local host 3000, it still gives me, hey, node.js. To verify that again, I need to stop this. So how can I stop this? It's pretty easy. All I have to say, hey, I want to stop a container. So I can just go ahead and say docker container stop and just mention 820. You can just mention 2-3 letters of this because it will figure it out automatically that, hey, there is no two container which are of the same name. So I better just stop this one, whatever that is. Yes, it always takes a little bit time to stop that. So don't panic out. Okay, it says stop that. Now, if I run this command again, docker container ls, nothing is there. Go back up here and hit a reload, and you cannot reach the website. Okay, this much is confirmed that I was able to create a REST API, at least one endpoint, and was able to containerize it. And now I want to run that. I can run that. Now, the idea is that it should be public. It should be available on my Docker Hub so that later on I can pull it, as well as anybody else who wants to can actually go ahead and pull this up. Let's go ahead and try this out. So all we have to do is, I want to say Docker push. You have already gone through with the Docker login, given the fact. Now I just want this name. So I'll be just saying, hey, by the way, I can actually just say Docker push, and I can scroll a little bit and take out this name. So I'll just copy this so that I don't make mistake. And I'll just paste it here. You can also write it in case you want to. I'll just say, hey, hit enter. And this will take my image and will push it onto the repository from where anybody can pull this off. You might be in AWS, Google Cloud, or anybody else. You will be able to pull this off because this is public one. There are other ways of storing these repositories or these images, but we're not that advanced right now. We're just going for that. I think this is going to take just a few more minutes. It's done. I don't need to expedite it or do some magic video editing. I'll just go into my profile, and there we go. I'm able to see Node.js. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. If I click on this, hey, there we go. Now this is available. Anybody can say Docker pull and just copy this command and can run this. Let's try this out. So what we're going to do is first, let's go to the dashboard, and we are going to go ahead and remove this image. We can do that from command line as well, but this Docker desktop is like really easy. I want to delete this forever, the container that's using it. So there is a container which is running it. All right. So we need to first, we'll remove this later on, but the whole idea is I'll walk you through that, how to remove this and all of that. Right now, even if you try that, that might not work because sometimes command line is much more powerful. This is working. There are a couple of more ways. So let's just go ahead and delete this. So right now we have no images on our system in the local, but we have something on the remote. So what we want to do now is we'll use the command line. And we'll just go up here, copy this, go back into the terminal at any point of time. And this doesn't need to be from this location. It can be from any location. I'll just say Docker pull, and this is going to pull the image, this time not from the local, but actually from the Docker hub. And it says, hey, I need to give a specific version, Docker pull, and then I have to say colon, and I have to say 0.1 dot release. And yes, we can actually mention it latest and stuff, then it will pull up easily and all of that. We'll work on through that later on. Right now, this is just the basics. And notice here, it is pulling it. It already exists. And now we have an image here. So a newer image was downloaded, and I can verify that with my Docker dashboard in the images that, hey, this image existed. And this time, this image was not something that we created. This actually was brought into our local from this remote repository. This is really fantastic. And now, notice one important thing. The person who is going to run this image on AWS or on GCP don't have to really worry about whether behind the scene there is a Node.js or not. Really, absolute nothing. It could be behind the scene in Python. I would have just said Node.js, and still the working functionality of how you manage it into Kubernetes or your cloud containers and all of that, that remains same. And that is the beauty about it. So that is the basics of behind the scene of an upcoming series that we are going to start very soon about the Docker and the Kubernetes, and you're going to have so much of the fun. So hit that subscribe because that series will come up very, very soon based on how much you hit that subscribe and how much you share on this video. Let's go ahead and catch up in next video.